Order à l'ordre. The Public Order Emergency Commission is now in session. La commission sur l'état d'urgence est maintenant ouverte.
Good morning. Bonjour. Another beautiful day in Ottawa. Okay, we have let me guess, another witness.
We do.
Okay,
Good morning, Commissioner.
Go ahead.
It's Frank Au for the Commission. And our next witness is Superintendent Dana Early from the OPP.
morning.
Superintendent Early, will you swear on a religious document or do you wish to affirm?
Yes, the Bible, please.
For the record, please state your full name and spell it out.
Dana Early. Dana is D-A-N-A. Early is E-A-R-L-E-Y.
Do you swear that the evidence to be given by you to this commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do so swear.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, Superintendent Early.
Good morning.
It's good to see you again.
Thank you. You as well.
So you attended an interview with me and my Commission colleagues back on the 9th of September.
Yes, I did.
And a summary of that interview was prepared afterwards. I understand that you recently had an opportunity to review that summary and there's some corrections you'd like to make.
Yes.
So if we can bring up that document, it's WTS 6022. If we go to page 13. So I understand there are two corrections you'd like to make on this page. And the first correction is at the first paragraph, am I right?
No, it's actually just the third paragraph in regards to decision-making. Just wanted to make it clear that ultimate decisions in regards to the operation plan were mine.
Okay, so the third paragraph that starts with following this call, right?
Yes.
So tell us what exactly you want changed.
There is a sentence there that indicates the direction came from the commissioner and Deputy Commissioner Harkins. That is incorrect. The decision to move forward was mine.
Okay, so that sentence that starts with she informed them that the
Yes.
change in direction came from Commissioner Carrick and Deputy Commissioner Harkins should be deleted, right?
That's correct.
And I understand that the first sentence that reads currently, following this call at 7:06 p.m., Superintendent Early advised her command table that they should proceed. You want that revised as advise her command table that she had decided that they would proceed. Am I
Yes.
right?
That's correct.
So I thought there was another change you wanted to make to the first paragraph. No?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So is there any other corrections you'd like to make?
No.
Okay, so we'll have those corrections made and this will be entered into evidence. Now, you are a superintendent with the Ontario Provincial Police.
That's correct.
And how many years have you served with the OPP?
28 years now.
Did you start your policing career with the OPP?
I did. Yes.
And back in January, when the Freedom Convoy events began, you were a strategic commander for the West region.
Yes, that's correct.
What areas were covered by the West region?
West region is basically Collingwood all the way down to Windsor. All the municipalities in that area that do not have their own police service is the responsibility of West Region OPP.
And how many superintendents were there for that region?
There's 3 superintendents.
Who are the other 2?
At the time is Superintendent Frankie Campisi and Superintendent Lisa Darling.
Okay. And do all three of you report to a chief superintendent?
Yes, that's correct.
Who was that in January?
It is Chief Superintendent Dwight Thibb.
Okay. And as a superintendent of the West Region, what were your responsibilities back in January of this year?
As part of my responsibilities, I support 4 of the 13 detachments that we have in West Region. And I support the operational support inspector and take on the role, take on the role of strategic commander.
Okay. And at that time, were you based in London?
That's correct.
And I understand that on the 9th of February, you assumed a new role when Deputy Commissioner Harkins appointed you as the Critical Incident Commander in Windsor.
That's correct. I received a call from Deputy Commissioner Harkins on the night of February 9th.
And we heard from Deputy Chief Crowley yesterday from the Windsor Police Service that you established a joint or unified command with the Windsor Police Service that oversaw the successful resolution of the blockade in Windsor.
That's correct.
So we'll come to those events a bit later,
Okay.
but I want to start by asking you about your training and experience that qualified you to take on those roles in January and February. Let's begin with your background with the incident command system. What kind of training have you received?
I have been a crisis negotiator for 13 years of my career, and crisis negotiators are used quite often in incidents. So I had experience that way. I am an incident commander as well as of 2012. And then in 2017, I was trained to become a critical incident commander.
And in terms of the courses that you had to attend before you assumed those roles, tell us about that too.
The Critical Incident Commander is a 4-week course where you receive training in regards to larger incidents, how to manage them, communication, the execution, the options. You hear several different presentations from your subject matter experts, which include our emergency response team.
Could I ask
Slow
you to
down.
go a little slower for the interpreters, please?
Sure. My apologies. Subject matter experts that would include crisis negotiators, our emergency response team, our tactical rescue unit, our K9 units, all options that would be used in a critical incident.
And which institution offer that course?
It's through the OPP,
And what year did you complete those trainings?
2017.
Were there different levels of training for an incident commander or critical incident commander?
The critical incident commander with the OPP is somewhat the highest at this point in
Okay.
regards to training.
And I understand you met some colleagues that you worked with ultimately when you were deployed to Windsor in February.
Yes, that's correct. I took the critical incident command course with now interim chief Jason Belair of Windsor Police.
And now you also took on some leadership training more recently. Tell us about that too.
I was fortunate enough to complete the Canadian Police College Executive Leadership in Policing course, which is a year course. And I also finished the Rotman Leadership course just in the fall of 2021.
And you met another colleague who was to work in the Windsor Incident Command, right?
That's correct.
Who was that?
Inspector Carl DeGraff and I completed the Rotman course together.
Okay. And isn't it true that you not only attended those courses and you had experience as an incident commander and critical incident commander, you also taught courses in that regard?
Yes, I have debriefed different calls on the incident command course as well as the critical incident command course.
Now, there are two frameworks that we've heard a little about that, as I understand from our interview, kind of guided you when you approached the situation in Windsor. One was the OPP framework for police preparedness for Indigenous critical incidents. For those of us who are not familiar with that framework, can you tell us, give us a quick overview of what that is about?
It stresses the importance of communication and a tiered response, almost like a step ladder, that you explore different options amongst during the incident to see what option would be best to safely resolve it. An important part of that policy is the fact, as I said, communication, and also the introduction of our provincial liaison team. that's a key part of the framework as well.
Okay, we'll come to talk a little more about that. And the other framework is the CACP, or Canadian Association of Chief of Police National Framework. And you mentioned in our interview that that was consistent with the OPP critical policy. Tell us more about that.
That's correct. It certainly highlights communication and the different tiered responses, depending on the situation.
So were you familiar with both frameworks when you took on the role of critical incident commander in February?
Yes.
All right, let's turn now to, before we get to your role as the critical incident commander in February, I want to start with your role as the strategic commander for the West region in January. So that was when you were still working out of London,
Yes.
Ontario. And what you talked to us a little bit about your responsibilities as the strategic commander, but what specifically were your involvement with respect to the Freedom Convoy or the protests traveling through the West?
We had, at the time, we had numerous slow rolls and protests happening throughout our different municipalities. I had oversight on the events, worked with the operational support inspector and each detachment commander to ensure that we had the proper resources to effectively look after the protests or slow rolls that were going through our municipalities.
Now, when Commissioner Carrick testified at the hearing, he told us about a blockade on Highway 402 on around February the 6th. Were you familiar with that incident?
Yes, I was involved in that incident.
Tell us about your involvement.
On February 6th, which was a Sunday, we became aware that the protesters had blocked the bridge, the Blue Water Bridge in Lambton County. As a result, our provincial liaison team, as well as our frontline members, were deployed to the area. Provincial liaison team were able to develop a rapport and a relationship with the protesters. And ultimately, there was a number of different trucks that weren't able to cross the border at that time. And one of them ultimately was a friend of one of the protesters. And one of the truck drivers, I believe it was livestock. He was traveling with something that needed to be in a certain area by a certain time. PLT liaised with the truck driver that was stuck and with the protesters, and were able to work out the opening of the bridge. So that was a success. The bridge did reopen. We also learned around that time that that group, or similar to that group of protesters, were planning on doing a slow roll on Highway 402 that week. So we liaised with the organizers of the slow roll and to try to find out as much information as possible so that we could have the proper resources in place.
Mm-hmm. So first, with respect to the incident on the Blue Water Bridge, how long did it take to resolve that event?
I'd have to make reference to my notes, but I know it was maybe 2 hours, most 2 to 3 hours.
So it was really short.
Yes.
And was Highway 402 the highway that led to Sarnia, the Blue Water Bridge?
That's correct.
And would that be within the OPP jurisdiction, the police?
Highway 402 is correct.
Okay. Now, you spoke about other slow roll events, and we heard a little bit about that yesterday from Deputy Chief Crowley. What other protests or slow rolls were happening in the West region around that time?
If memory serves me, we almost had a slow roll in each municipality, but ones that I can recall specifically would be Essex County, Norfolk County, Brant County, South Bruce County, Huron County. So there was quite a few.
And as the strategic commander at that time responsible for these events, what steps did you take to monitor the situation or to prepare for any further escalation of the events?
Each event was specifically assigned to the detachment commander. He or she would then assign an incident commander to have oversight of the specific event happening in their area. They would also work with our provincial liaison team to find out as much information from the protesters. And we would ensure from a regional level that they had the supports that they needed.
Mhm. Now, were you a recipient of the OPP Hendon reports?
Yes.
And did you read them regularly?
Yes, but I focused on the areas that were involving our municipalities.
Mhm. So turning our attention now to Windsor, we heard yesterday that there was a Hendon report on February the 4th that deals specifically with the potential blockade. So if I could take you to that report. The document number is OPP 50825. If we go to page 6, please. We go down. So you see the second bullet says commercial truck drivers and supporters may conduct slow rolls on roadways near the Ambassador Bridge over the next 3 days and may attempt to block the bridge on February the 7th. So this seems to be, compared to the earlier reports, this seems to be a more specific warning, particular to the bridge and with a date. Do you remember if you received this report or read it at around that time?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you know what actions, if any, were taken by the OPP to mitigate that risk?
I can speak to February 7th. That's when I became aware through Superintendent Crowley, now interim deputy chief, that the bridge had been blocked. I received an email from him. I then had a conversation with him asking him what he needed. And at that time, he was looking for information in regards to what was available. I said, basically, whatever you needed.
I think I know the one you're referring to. Did you say February the 7th?
7th, that's
But before we get to that, I think there was another email earlier that you were copied on. So if I could take you to that earlier
Sure.
email, I believe it's dated February the 4th, and the document number is WPS 501880. So for context, I believe this is an email from Chief Superintendent Thip
Okay.
to Deputy Chief Crowley, and you were copied on that. So you see the headings, Windsor Slow Roll
Yes.
/ Bridge Protest. So you weren't the direct recipient, but you were copied on this.
Yes.
And so in this email, Chief Thip talked about the prospect. So we go to the second line. He said, should intel be received or action by demonstrators taken to shut down the Ambassador Bridge, don't hesitate to reach out for joint assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were copied because you were overseeing the emergency response team for the region. First of all, what were your responsibilities as for oversight over the emergency response team? What's the emergency response team?
So as part of the strategic commander, that's one of the teams that I support. So it's an oversight in regards to, do they have the proper resources, training up to date? I work with their team lead in regards to making sure that they have what they need.
So in this email, it seems like the OPP was taking a kind of wait and see approach. Is that fair?
We were waiting to see what Windsor actually required. So in this email, Deputy Chief Crowley was obviously being given my name because of my role as strategic commander.
And beyond waiting for a further request from Windsor, was there anything that, in your view, the OPP could do proactively to mitigate the risk at this point before the blockade materialized?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Well, let's go then to February the 7th. Now, you mentioned an email from Deputy Chief Crowley.
Yes.
I believe that email is actually dated February the 8th, if we're thinking about the same email. So I'll call up that document, WPS 5 zeros or 6 zeros, WPS 60374. Now, is this the email you had in mind? Or was there another one?
There was one prior and we had a conversation as well.
Okay, so tell us about that earlier exchange.
It was basically confirming that the bridge had been blocked and that he was looking for an awareness of resources available. We then had a conversation. I wanted to confirm if he was asking for resources or if he was just trying to figure out options at that time. So I learned that he was trying to figure out options of what was available. And it was at that time that we had decided to send together jointly, we decided to send provincial liaison team members to Windsor to see if they could assist.
Mm-hmm. So is this email a follow-up to that earlier exchange?
It is.
And so when he was asking you, I know your people are very spread out, but my ask at this point is if we were to need POU or PLT down here, what would availability be?
Mhm.
So it seems like he's ascertaining the potential availability of OPP resources.
Absolutely. He's looking for options.
And you mentioned earlier that you were sending some PLT members to Windsor.
That's correct.
Was that before or after this email?
That was immediately after. I believe they went down like that day because the email's at 2:00 in the morning. So I wouldn't have got it until I woke up in the morning. But
So the sending of the 2 PLT members was a response to this request.
that's correct.
What about POU? He asked about POU here as well.
Again, he confirmed that he was just looking for options. So we discussed options.
So this is February the 8th. Now, we heard yesterday that Chief Masuno from the Windsor Police Service sent a letter on February the 9th, the following day, to Minister Jones. I don't think I need to call up that document, but for reference, the document ID is WIN 401648. And in that letter, Chief Masuno requested a minimum of 100 officers. Now, was that request before or after you were appointed as the critical incident commander to Windsor?
I wasn't appointed until the night of the 9th.
Okay,
So it would
so probably before.
before.
And we saw also on February 9th a document prepared by Deputy Chief Crowley. Before I take you to that document, I want to take you first to something you said in your interview about the relationship between resource request and planning. So we go to your summary at page 9, please.
Sorry, Council, could I get the ID for that document again?
Yes, it's WTS 6022. And Mr. Clerk, I'll be making frequent references to this summary, so it may assist to have that document open. So if we go to page 9. So Superintendent, you see under the heading, relationship between resource request and planning, you told us that when you took command on February the 9th, Windsor Police Service did not know the specific numbers and types of officers it required, and that the on-the-ground situation on February 9th dictated bringing in additional frontline and traffic officers to ensure public and officer safety. OPP accordingly sent as many officers as possible. After Superintendent Early arrived in Windsor on the morning of February the 10th and began to develop a plan, she was able to develop more specific numbers and types of resources required to ensure that police had options to respond to various contingencies. So I want to show you a document that Deputy Chief Crowley prepared as of the 9th and ask you if that reflects the kind of lack of specific types that you mentioned in the summary. And that document is WPS 60610. So we heard from Deputy Crowley yesterday that he prepared this on the 9th when Windsor made the request for 100 officers. We scroll down a bit. So it talks about different shifts and so on. And then there's more about the situation at that time. Does this reflect your understanding of the nature of the request that was sent on the 9th?
I'm not sure if I know what you're asking, but it reflected what they thought at the time they required. So when I arrived and we were able to assess the entire situation together, that's when we started to figure out plans and options, and then therefore the resources to support those.
So I guess what I'm wondering is, how is this kind of request in terms of what was needed different from the kind of request that you would have made to the different POU units across the province, for instance, after you arrived and started developing a plan?
Well, this specific request that you have posted here is for the front line. So POU was in addition to that. So I don't know if we could compare the two. But when the Unified Command was created, we had a mission, and that was to open the bridge to get the flow of traffic back, with officer and public safety being paramount. And then that's when we started to develop the plans, which included a POU option.
Okay. If we go back to your interview summary, to that page that we were on before, you see the last sentence of that paragraph. She explained that developing an operational plan was essential to ensure that the deployment of resources would be impactful and resolve the blockade. Why was it essential? Why was an operational plan essential?
Well, before you request resources or you have officers attend, you need to be able to articulate to them the expectations of their role, why they're coming, and the tasks that they will be given. And without a plan and a mission as to what you want to achieve, that would be very hard to do.
Okay. So, so these are the initial steps before you became the critical incident commander. So let's turn our attention now to February the 9th, when you got a call from Deputy Commissioner Harkins appointing you as the critical incident commander. Tell us about that initial call.
Deputy Commissioner Harkins called me. He asked if I could attend Windsor to assist, that my role would be the CIC of the event, and that it was an urgent situation, so that I would receive the resources that I needed. He also alerted me that I had a teleconference that I needed to join within minutes. So the phone call was very quick.
So there was an urgency that he impressed on you. And just to understand the nature of the role of a critical incident commander, we've heard evidence before about the different tiers of command. There's the strategic command, there's the operational command, and there's the tactical command. Now, you were operating as a strategic commander before this appointment.
Yes.
And what is the role of a critical incident commander? Is it operating at a strategic or operational level?
It's at an operational level and specifically assigned to an incident.
So what was the objective of your appointment as the critical incident commander? Or for short, I'll just call it the operational commander.
The mission was to restore the flow of traffic to and from the bridge and into Canada and the US with respecting the Charter of Rights and keeping public and officer safety paramount.
Now, I understand that you went to Windsor the next day.
That's correct.
But on the 9th, you were still in London.
Yes.
What time did you get that call from Deputy Harkins?
It was approximately 7:30, 7:45, and then I was on teleconferences until well into the early morning.
So you got the call in the evening and you started to make some other calls.
Yes.
Tell us about those other calls, the initial calls that you made.
There was a call to my chief of West Region to provide him updates, and he was well aware because the deputy commissioner had contacted him. I also had teleconferences with the POU hub and the different team leaders of the POU teams.
What are the POU hubs?
They were hubs created that consisted of different POU teams from different services that were being deployed throughout the province to assist with protests.
And when you said services, are these OPP detachments or are these municipal services as well?
OPP and municipal.
How many POU units are there across Ontario? Can you say?
Oh, I can't, sorry. I can tell you who was on the calls or who I dealt with, but it included obviously our team. It included Hamilton at the time and Waterloo, and ultimately London assisted as well, and RCMP.
So you reach out to the POU units in these municipalities that evening?
Yes, so the deputy commissioner had advised me that the teleconference was already set, it was already scheduled, and that I would be joining them. And they would learn that I was going to be the CIC and Unified Command and heading to Windsor.
What did you find out from the teleconference about the availability of these POU teams?
We discussed numbers and what was available. We discussed relative to the incident, in regards to when could they attend, who was available to assist with planning. So that those were the basis of the conversations.
Was there a request to deploy those units on that evening?
Yes.
What did you ask for?
I asked for the planners. So each team identified basically a team lead or a planner. So I asked for the planners to join me in Windsor the next day.
Now, at this stage, you didn't have a plan yet, right?
Correct.
So if we go back to what we talked about earlier, about the need for a plan to inform the asking of resources, what did you ask for and what could reasonably be expected at this stage?
I needed them to become very familiar with the incident and all the details of the incident, and then create a plan.
What about numbers?
Well, I needed to know what would be available. But again, it wasn't until they had a plan that they would say that this plan requires this many officers.
Okay. So you talked about how you spoke to the chief. I believe that's Chief Thip.
That's correct.
You spoke to, you were engaged in these teleconferences about the POU availability. Who else did you call?
I believe it was 2 teleconferences. Well, it was with the chief and 2 other teleconferences with POU hubs.
What about, did you make contact with Windsor Police Service at all?
I did. I spoke with Deputy Chief Crowley.
And tell us about that conversation.
He provided an oversight and the situational and situational awareness for me in regards to what they were dealing with at the moment. We talked about logistics, obviously, when I would be arriving. I gave him an overview of the teleconferences I had been on in regards to POU.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I could take you to another OPP document, it's OPP 404540. I understand that that night, the last thing you did that night at 11:59 p.m., you sent an email to your superiors summarizing the situation in Windsor as you've gathered. So I'm taking you to that email. If we could go to page 14, please. Go down. So February 9th, I think I was wrong on the time, is at 23:58. So 2 minutes before midnight, you sent an email to Harkins and DeMarco. Who's DeMarco?
That is Deputy Commissioner DeMarco.
Okay. How many deputy commissioners are there?
There are 3, and there's a provincial commander as well.
Okay. So you sent an email to these 2 deputies and you summarize the situation as you found them in Windsor. We scroll down further. There are many bullet points. I want you to help us unpack the situation a bit based on these points. What did you learn? What's the situation on the ground in Windsor?
I learned obviously about the numbers, what they were dealing with in regards to attendance, as well as vehicles, the types of vehicles. I also learned the area that they had kind of blocked, the length of it, where it is located in the city. I also learned about an arrest that was made. So there was a person who had jumped the curb and into the crowd. That person obviously was charged and arrested with dangerous drive, and that the crowd became very agitated when the arrest occurred. And they actually took the opportunity to expand the area that they had been in. I learned too from Deputy Chief Crowley that the crowd itself was somewhat unorganized and disjointed. Hard to kind of figure out exactly what they wanted or to communicate or negotiate with them. And at that time as well, he explained that there had been a number of transport trucks and vehicles on the bridge, but they had all been removed at that point. So I made the decision that I asked Staff Sergeant Jamie Smith of Essex OPP, so he would be the closest incident commander, to attend the command post for the evening. I also asked that our situational reports be implemented. So it's basically a template. We introduced those to the command post, and I asked for those to be provided to me every 2 hours until my arrival. And then they continued while we were there.
So that's what you did that first night.
That's correct.
If we go back to your summary, I want to take you to page 3. Because you spoke to us about this email, and then at the end of that paragraph, you said, Superintendent Early nonetheless believed that a policing solution to the demonstration was possible. What did you mean by that? The policing solution in your mind?
I still believed and was hopeful that negotiations could occur and that we could develop a rapport and a relationship with the protesters through our provincial liaison teams.
Was that an approach informed by the 2 frameworks that you told us about?
That's correct.
Now, before we go to the next day, earlier that day, before you got the call from Deputy Harkins, I think you told us in the interview that you watched a morning press conference where the mayor of Windsor, Mayor Dilkins, requested resources without specifying the numbers. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically watching it, but I do know that a request was submitted.
Right. So, and during our interview, you shared your perspectives on making public announcements of this nature. Tell us about your view on this.
In regards to specific numbers requested at incidents?
No, about making public announcements. I think we've heard some evidence that normally the request for resources go from one chief to another, from chief to chief.
Yes.
And it's not typical that public announcements by politicians were made, and you shared your perspective on this kind of public announcement. So I'm just hoping that you could enlighten us.
Okay. It's been my experience that when any municipal service requires our assistance, no matter what the incident, the request needs to go from their chief to our commissioner. The commissioner's command team then reviews the request and deploys the requested resources. So to hear it come from a politician was different from my experience.
And after you became the critical incident commander, did you take any steps to change the approach or any kind of media strategy that you adopted?
I respect the fact that any council or mayor, they can have their own press conferences and release information. But I urged Windsor Police Service to work with the mayor's office to make sure that our messages are consistent.
And was any further public announcements made for resources after you assumed the role of critical incident commander?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, in this case, the announcement on the 9th did not specify a particular number, how many officers were needed. Do you have any view on whether those numbers should be made publicly in a request?
In my opinion, I do not believe that they should be made publicly.
Why not?
It jeopardizes perhaps the public and police officer safety by letting the public know the amount of officers that are attending may lead to people then bolstering their protests or whatever that looks like if they know the tactics or perhaps the amount of officers that are attending an incident.
Okay. So let's go now to the next day, February 10th. I understand that you had an early morning call with Deputy Harkins, right?
Correct.
At
And
8:30.
Deputy DeMarco.
And Deputy DeMarco. So tell us what was said in that morning call.
They wanted to make sure that I had started implementing a team, putting a team in place. And obviously I had told them that I was on the road, I was heading to Windsor, and they indicated that whatever resources I needed, they would be provided.
Was anything said about Windsor being a priority?
Yes,
Tell us about that.
yes. They stressed to me that Windsor was my priority and I needed to focus solely on Windsor and that it was a priority for the province.
Did they explain why Windsor was a priority?
No.
Now, if I could take you to page 2 of the summary. So if we go to the 3rd paragraph, near the middle of the paragraph, do you see the sentence that starts with during a February 10th, 8:30 a.m. call?
Yes.
So it says, Deputy Commissioners Harkins and DeMarco again advised Superintendent Early that Windsor was the priority and that it was urgent to resolve the blockade. Superintendent Early understood that the resolution was urgent because the bridge closure was having massive economic impacts, including job layoffs on Windsor, Ontario, and Canada, that the crowd of protesters at the blockade was increasing in size and that the public and officer safety risks were escalating. Now, you understood that to be the case. Was that, where did that understanding come from?
It was part of the conversation, but in regards to the increase in size, the economic impacts, the risk to public and officer safety, that was from my awareness from the teleconferences I had been on and discussions with Deputy Chief Crowley.
So you had this call at 8:30, and I believe by 9 a.m. you had your mission statement written.
Yes.
So if we go to the summary at page 5, we excerpted your mission statement, I believe, from your notes.
Thank you.
And it reads, the OPP and our policing partners will keep the peace, enforce legislation, establish and maintain the safe flow of traffic and respecting individuals' charter rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of speech, with public and officer safety being paramount. Why was the mission statement or the drafting of a mission statement such a priority for you?
It is it's the goal of any team member, no matter what uniform you're wearing, your rank, your role in regards to the team. That is our goal during the incident.
And did this version of the statement continue to be the mission as events unfolded?
Yes. Yeah.
So I understand that a plan was finalized by the end of the day on the 11th, and the plan was implemented on the 12th. Was this the same statement that appeared in that ultimate plan?
Yes.
How did you come up with this plan? How did you draft it?
Based on the situation, right? That's where your mission comes from and what your goal is, what you're trying to resolve. That's how your mission statements come through. And obviously, as a CIC in the training that we receive, mission statements and the importance of them are discussed.
And there are references to respecting individuals' charter rights. How did you intend to do that?
Absolutely. Well, by obviously giving them the right to peaceful assembly and to honor their freedom of speech. We tried to do that through communications with our provincial liaisons team.
Mhm. So that was 9 a.m. What time did you arrive in Windsor?
Oh, I think it was approximately 10. I had to stop and pick up my scribe as well. So I think it was around 10:30. I can't remember. I'd have to refer to my notes.
And what was a scribe supposed to do when you're the critical incident commander?
So the scribe is a very important role. She took all of my notes for me. So she captured the majority of conversations and timings, people's phone numbers, whatnot.
So the different volumes of notes that we
Yes.
receive in disclosure, those were the scribe's notes, not your notes.
That's correct.
Okay. So you went to Windsor and you met with the command team from the Windsor Police Service.
Yes.
Tell us about that meeting. What kind of reception did you receive?
Very welcoming. Because of the relationships I knew, as I said, Deputy Chief, at the time, Deputy Chief Belair, as well as Inspector DeGraff. They then introduced me to other members of their command post. Obviously, it was referred to as the EOC here as well. So I met everybody. They were very welcoming. They appreciated the support and the assistance and the resources that the OPP was providing. And they also welcomed the experience that our organization has in regards to major prolonged events.
Was any decision made at that initial meeting about how the WPS and the OPP would be working together?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, it was right off the start. It was a unified command. They ultimately respected that I would have final say on a lot of the plans because of the amount of resources that we were bringing, and that included. But everything before it was decided was always referred to by both myself and the CIC from WPS.
So yesterday we heard from Deputy Crowley. I think he described the relationship as, I'm trying to look for his description. He described the integration as seamless.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about how the OPP and WPS commands would at times be stepping forward and back. Were you here when he testified?
I watched it. Yes.
You watched it.
Yes.
Do you agree with that description?
It was seamless, and we supported each other. It was a remarkable team effort.
And in your interview with us, at page 3 of your summary, you referred to this high degree of trust and confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more about that.
As I mentioned, Windsor Police respected the experience and the skill set that the OPP was bringing to the table due to the numerous events we've experienced as an organization in regards to critical incidents and protracted critical incidents in particular. So with that, that's where the trust and the respect came through. But at the same time, we weren't able to do what we did if it wasn't for the local knowledge and the networks and the partnerships that Windsor Police already had in existence.
Now, I think Deputy Crowley referred to this command structure as unified command.
Yes.
And in your interview with us, you referred to it as joint command. Are they the same thing?
Pretty much, yes.
We've heard other terms in Ottawa, integrated command. Like, what's your understanding if there are any differences between integrated, joint, or unified?
Really, I think to explain ours, unified would articulate it best.
Okay. And in terms of the expertise that the OPP was bringing, I think yesterday Deputy Crowley referred specifically to maybe planning and specifically the POU planning.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, so when I arrived in Windsor, I requested subject matter expert in regards to POU planning, Inspector Jason Unin. I contacted him and I requested he attend to offer his expertise in regards to a plan.
Sorry, name again?
Inspector Jason Unin.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the command team then, because after you arrive in Windsor, I guess one of the first things you did was to assemble a command table.
Yes.
And during our interview, you said that you wanted broad representation at the command table and subject matter experts in all the essential areas to ensure that those areas are covered. What are the major areas that you had to cover?
Those areas consisted of traffic, crime, provincial liaisons teams, media, and logistics and resources. In addition to that, we also were able to set up a staging area. So there was a team that was in charge of the staging area as well.
What about intelligence?
Absolutely. Yes, intelligence as well.
And how was intelligence represented at this command table?
They deployed a team leader to sit in the emergency operations center with us and a team member as well. So they were constantly feeding us any intel that they were getting. And I'd like to mention too, all those subject matter experts that I just listed off there, it wasn't just OPP, but Windsor had the same representation. So for example, in Intel, we had OPP Intel as well as Windsor Intel in the command post with us.
So you had subject matter experts from both OPP and Windsor Police Service represented at the table.
Correct.
And they included intelligence. I think you mentioned PLT.
Yes.
POU, you mentioned Inspector
Yes.
Unin. Who was responsible for logistics?
Inspector Wendy Burrow as from OPP, as well as Inspector Jen Crosby from Windsor Police Service.
What about other agencies such as the CBSA?
Yes, so CBSA was included in the command post. They had a representative there, a team leader, as well as the Windsor Fire had representation and Windsor Emergency Services, so paramedics.
Why was it important for these other agencies to be included at the command table?
All of those everybody who had a part of our command post provided us with different options, right? And options are very much needed in an incident like this. So it's important to create an environment that's inclusive, and communication is key so that everybody could provide ideas to resolve the situation effectively. Because the situation itself was very dynamic and fluid, we wanted to make sure that everything was covered. If you think about fire or EMS, that they were in the loop just in case we needed their assistance, which at times we did.
I understand you also set up a system where you had alternates so that you can go to sleep.
Yes.
Who was your alternate?
Superintendent Derek Needham.
And was there a similar system for the Windsor Incident Command?
Yes.
And who are those two?
So Inspector Carl DeGraff worked days with me, and then at night it was Deputy Chief Crowley.
Why is it important to have these alternates?
To go and rest your head for a little bit, and obviously just to provide some relief.
Okay. So far we talked about the team at the operational level, the command table that we just talked about. I want to ask you now about the relationship between the operational level functioning and the strategic leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So on the Windsor side, who was the strategic commander?
I believe you would have to confirm with them, but I saw that the Deputy Chief Belair.
Right. And would the chief of the Windsor Police Service also be at the strategic leadership level?
Yes.
What about the OPP? Who were the strategic leaders?
For West Region, Superintendent Campisi looked after that role, but also it would have also included our Chief Thib, and then the OPP command as well, commissioners and deputy commissioners.
So Commissioner Kirik
Mm-hmm.
and Deputy Harkins.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during the interview, you spoke to us about the importance for the strategic leadership to give the operational commanders autonomy.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Yes. the autonomy that is required is very important because decisions need to be made in a very timely manner when dealing with critical incidents. So that's really highlights the importance. They also know and can trust in the not only the experience the team has, but the training and the subject matter experts, the skill set that they bring, so that they know that those decisions being made are the best options for the situation, what's happening.
Help us understand, why is autonomy connected to timeliness of decision making?
You need to make sure that a decision is made. The failure to make a decision can almost be just as bad as making an improper decision. So that's why the timeliness is very important, right? And these situations, things are happening minute by minute. You need to be able to make decisions based on your awareness. And the CIC has the best situational awareness to make those decisions.
Why was it the CIC who had the best situational awareness?
You are in the midst of it. You have all the intel coming in, you are there, you have all the feedback from your subject matter experts. So that's why you have the utmost situational awareness.
During your time in Windsor as the critical incident commander, did you enjoy the kind of autonomy that you expected from the strategic leadership?
I did, and I appreciated it.
How was your relationship with the Windsor strategic leadership?
The same. They respected it from their command in the command post as well as mine.
Did you experience any interference at all, improper interference with your decision making as the operational commander?
No.
What about the city of Windsor or the mayor's office? Did you experience, what was your relationship with those entities?
Very little. Windsor Police dealt with them and liaised with the city.
Okay. Okay, so we've now covered the command team and the relationship with the strategic leadership. I want to talk to you now about the plan. We talked a bit about the plan, and I understand that you came to Windsor on the 10th, but by the end of the day on the 11th, you had a plan finalized and ready for action. Am I right?
That's correct.
How did that come about?
The remarkable team that I had. So with the mission that was set out, that everybody was very much aware of, the expectations were clearly explained to the officers and the subject matter experts in regards to what was needed. And that's how plans came together.
Now, let's talk about the different elements of that overall plan. During the interview, you mentioned many sub-plans.
Yes.
And you said those are necessary as part of the contingency planning.
Yes.
And they involve areas like traffic, towing, mass arrest, prisoner transport, and some of the other areas that we talked about, intelligence, PLT, POU, and so on. I want to ask you specifically about three of those areas.
Okay.
And I want to start by asking you about the PLT element.
Okay.
So through the PLT planning, I understand that you came to learn something about the protesters group, about the leadership, as well as about potential counter-protest.
Yes.
So let's talk first about your understanding of the leadership. What did you learn through the PLT planning during those 2 days?
Mm-hmm. I learned through PLT that the protesters themselves were described as just disjointed. They had different goals. It was explained to me that the PLT was really dealing with three different groups within the protesters. And that was causing concern, as well as it was a challenge for our PLT to develop rapport or to really get anywhere, because the groups themselves were not agreeing.
Mm-hmm.
I also learned from PLT of counter protests as well, and the concern for that. So they had discussions with an associate or a member from the auto union And he expressed his displeasure with the protest, and in fact was sharing with them that he was going to take matter into his own hands if it was not resolved. I was very grateful for the rapport and the relationship that PLT was able to develop with him. And through that, we asked for time for his patience.
If I could take you to your summary, because I wanted to ask you about that incident.
Okay.
If we go to page 11. So this is, you talked about this incident involving the president of the local auto workers union chapter. You see in the middle of the paragraph?
Yes, I
PLT
do.
informed Superintendent Early that David Cassidy, the president of the local auto workers union chapter, Unifor Local 444, claimed that he had spoken to Ontario Premier Doug Ford and that he was willing to bring auto workers to the blockade site to forcibly clear out protesters by Monday, February the 14th, if police had not cleared the blockade by that date. What kind of danger does this pose to your team as you were planning for action the weekend?
This is extremely concerning as a CIC, and it was just other options now that I had to consider, that not only the protesters perhaps would not like the plan of action, but we may have counter protesters attending as well that would create significant issues for public and officer safety.
So was this an example of how you incorporated PLT in planning for contingencies?
Yes.
Let me ask you now about the POU planning. So you mentioned earlier that Inspector Yunin was in charge of that aspect.
Yes.
And I understand that on, was it the 10th or the 11th, that you had a number of meetings with him and he advised you. So let's go to your summary. Maybe that
Okay.
will help,
Thank
I
you.
suppose. Page 6 of your summary. So you see that at 4:21 p.m., you had a
Yes.
meeting with Inspector Yunin, and he advised you that a mass removal of protesters would be neither safe nor sustainable. Tell us more about that discussion.
So this is after he had arrived in Windsor. He obviously had time to meet with all the other team leaders from the POU teams, and as well take a look at the situation itself. He understood, because it was such a long area, the 3 to 4 kilometers that they had occupied, that it would not be safe, as he stated in my summary, to clear the entire area all at once. So with that, he provided options to clearing out different sections of the protest area.
And did you agree with his assessment?
I did.
Was this an example of how you, as the operational commander, defer to your subject matter experts?
Yes.
The third area I want to ask you about in terms of planning is the involvement of the intelligence experts.
Yes.
Was it your objective to have your operation be intelligence-led?
Yes, I mean, intelligence does need to be considered in regards to what we're finding on open source or wherever the intelligence is coming from. And it was important to hear also from both teams, so from the OPP intelligence as well as Windsor intelligence, because of the different networks that both teams had, they were providing us with a better situational awareness.
So in terms of the tools available to your team, as I understand it, in addition to open source, which you mentioned, you also was getting some help from the US partners.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
That was mainly through Windsor Police Service because of the relationship they had with Intel through the States.
And in terms of other resources available to you, I understand that there was a drone that was made available,
Yes,
as well as poll cameras from the CBSA,
that's correct.
and even a helicopter on the day of the operation.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Again, just to provide current and up-to-date situational awareness, so that we could have an idea of exactly what was going on in this very dynamic situation.
We've also heard yesterday about the presence of children
Yes.
during the blockade. And how did intelligence inform your planning about this aspect?
Mhm. Obviously, that was a concern of mine that if we had to use the plan of action, that I wanted the lowest amount of children to be there. Intelligence was able to provide me with areas that they had detected where the children were hanging out or were present in the protest. They were also able to tell me that because of their intelligence, because of their overwatch, that the majority of the children went home at night, and very little of them stayed overnight. And so that led me to obviously looking at the option of going first thing in the morning with any plan of operation if needed.
Was that the plan to have the action begin early in the morning?
Yes.
And what considerations led you to that decision?
Knowing from intel that they had not observed any children overnight, and that when children were present, it was usually not till later in the day.
What about the size of the crowd?
Absolutely. So certain times of night. So the crowd, as in my summary, and I know Deputy Chief Crowley spoke to it, it would get more unruly at certain times of night. And so we had to consider that, and numbers were higher at certain times at night. But as it got colder and the later it got in the evening, a lot of people did return home. So by considering an early morning operation, that again would hopefully decrease the number of protesters that we were dealing with.
Mm-hmm. So we've now talked about the different elements or sub-plans within the overall plan.
Mm-hmm.
Turning our attention now to the overall plan. If we go to your summary at page 6, and we go down, that's right, to the section approval of plans, the second paragraph. So on February the 11th, Superintendent Early also approved an overall operational plan titled Operations Plan, Freedom Convoy, Windsor Ambassador Bridge. The plan stated that it contemplated an escalation in police response that is a considered and measured approach, and that events associated with Ambassador Bridge blockade convoys shall be addressed at the lowest competent level in an effort to effect a peaceful resolution. So earlier you mentioned in the context of discussing the frameworks, I think you talked about the measured approach, the use of PLT to engage and all of that. I want to ask you specifically to explain about this concept of addressing events at the lowest competent level in the context of a kind of ladder or escalation. What does that mean, the lowest competent level?
The less invasive, the less, so lowest competent level would be, the prime example would be our provincial liaison team. Being able to discuss the removal of protesters, for them to leave on their own would be ideal.
So that's what you would try first?
Absolutely.
And then if that did not meet with success, then you escalate.
Yes.
What would be the next ladder or the next step up the ladder?
I think jointly along with PLT, we are also using a media strategy to make sure that we were educating everybody in regards to that it was unlawful to be there, that there was other options that they could express their freedom of speech. So there was the media attached at the same time as provincial liaison teams were trying to develop rapport with the protesters.
And then if that didn't work?
So next steps, we looked for different options in regards to enforcement. I do know that I had conversations with Windsor about their bylaws. There was a number of different parking bylaws in that area. So we learned that the protesters would park on side streets and then attend the protest. Their parking on side streets were illegal, so their bylaw enforcement was then deployed to the area. So a number of different tickets were given out to the vehicles, as well as some were towed. So that's just another level to let protesters know that they aren't to be there.
What's the next step up?
So again, all of these steps are not independent. All of these things are continuing. So even as cars are being towed by bylaw, we're still trying to have negotiations and develop rapport with the protesters through PLT. We're still using media to get that message out. The next step would be enforcement.
So we heard yesterday that even during the the enforcement phase, attempts were still being made to allow some protesters to continue to protest, perhaps on the sidewalk outside the exclusion zone. Can you tell us more about that?
So the set area or the operational area was certainly explained through our media strategy, through the PLT, that people needed to be removed from there or remove themselves. And then other options throughout the city are really available, any public area. We have to keep in mind, though, that there are private businesses as well, and they wouldn't welcome protesters. So we had to make sure that we educated them in regards to that.
Okay, so by the end of the day on February the 11th, I understand you approve this plan,
That's correct.
and were you satisfied that you had received all of the necessary resources by then to implement the plan the next day?
Yes.
And the plan then was to implement the action on the early morning on the 12th.
Correct.
So I want to take you now to some specific events that unfolded on the 11th while you were making these plans.
Okay.
I understand that sometime in the afternoon while you were working on your plan, things were happening on the ground, and specifically, there was a kind of perceived breakthrough with the PLT team, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Tell us what happened.
One of the protesters had approached our provincial liaison team and stated that if they had received a letter from the government indicating that the government was willing to meet with them, that they would leave. So PLT brought this to my attention immediately. I then asked for assistance through my command team to see if this letter see if the government would agree to this, and to see if this letter could be produced.
So in our interview, you described this as a kind of breakthrough because this was the first substantial request that the PLT team received from the protesters.
Yes, it was very hopeful.
If we go to your summary at page 12. So the second paragraph at 4:25 p.m., that's when you spoke to Commissioner Carrick about this request.
Correct.
And then by 5:29 p.m., a draft letter was already approved.
That's correct.
That's remarkably quick, within hours.
Yes.
What happened during those hours?
Quite a bit of back and forth in regards to just clarity as to what Mr. Neufeld was asking. And then, of course, it was the commissioner's command team who assisted in getting the letter so quickly, but it certainly demonstrated that we were trying our best to get the protesters what they were asking for.
You were still optimistic
Yes.
about the lowest competent level.
Yes, yes, I
Okay,
was.
so at 5:30, you engaged, you took part in a teleconference
Yes,
with some of the strategic leadership, and you learn that, so if we go down further the page, so near the middle of that paragraph, starting at 5:30, you see the reference to Superintendent Alakis informed call participants that PLT would be providing a letter to the Ottawa protesters that was similar to the letter from the provincial government to the Windsor protesters, right?
correct.
So now, Acting Superintendent Bowden has testified at this hearing a week or so earlier,
Yes,
and he told us, perhaps the best way to summarize his evidence is if I take you to his summary.
okay.
Can we go to WTS 6037, please? So this is the interview summary of Inspector Bowden.
Okay.
If we go to page 4. Go down. So you see that on February the 11th, the same day you were dealing with this breakthrough in Windsor. On February 11th, 2022, Inspector Bowden met virtually with Mr. Stewart and Mr. Hutchinson again. The plan at that point was to offer a meeting in exchange for demonstration leaders demanding that the trucks exit downtown Ottawa and denounce any criminal activity. Inspector Bowden then briefed Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson, who was in agreement with the plan. Later that day, Inspector Bowden also exchanged emails with OPP Superintendent Alakis about the actions being taken in Windsor and what kind of reaction that might create among the demonstrators in Ottawa. So things were happening in Ottawa, and you were dealing with rapidly developing situations in Windsor.
Yes.
So going back to your summary, this call at 5:30, when you were informed by Alakis, Superintendent Alakis, about this development in Ottawa. Remember the middle of the paragraph?
Yes.
So what the evidence given by Inspector Bowden, does that accord with your understanding on the 11th at around 5:30?
Yes.
And then if we go down the page, a series of meetings starting at around 6:17 p.m., continuing to about, if we go to the next page, continuing to about 7:06 p.m., a series of meetings between you and your command team, as well as between you and your strategic leadership
Yes.
at the OPP took place. Can you take us through those series of meetings?
Yes. After the call at approximately 5:30 that included Superintendent Alakis, I made the decision that perhaps we need to delay what was happening in Windsor because the influence it could have in Ottawa. I then had conversations with the strategic commanders, Deputy Commissioner Harkins and Commissioner Karik, and learned that, well, they reminded me that I did not need to act in my strategic commander role, that I needed to focus on Windsor. And it was during that conversation that they said, are you ready to go? Is your plan ready? And do you have the resources? Will the plan itself emphasize public and officer safety? I said yes to that. And then I changed my mind and decided to continue with my plan.
Okay.
Realizing that I didn't know the intimate knowledge of what was going on in Ottawa because my focus had to be Windsor.
Right. So going back to your initial concern when you were reconsidering implementing the plan the next day, what implications did you think the action in Windsor may have in Ottawa? What were those concerns?
That it might agitate things there. And at the same time, I had to, again, my focus had to be on Windsor. So if we didn't go forward with the plan and prolonged, allowing the protesters to continue, what would that mean for Windsor? And that was my priority.
And then after you spoke to your command team, you had this discussions with the strategic leadership. And that included Commissioner Karik, right?
Correct.
And Deputy Commissioner Harkins.
Yes.
And in that discussion between the strategic leadership and your role as an operational commander, help us understand what was the strategic input and how that affected your decision ultimately as the operational commander.
It was a reminder that I did not have all the good situational awareness of what was happening in Ottawa. They did, and that my focus needed to be on Windsor. And I could tell them without a doubt that the plan was ready. The officers were ready. We had enough resources. We had tried the stepped approach, and we were not getting anywhere. Of course, I was hopeful about the letter because at this time it had not been delivered yet. But any CIC will tell you that you have your plan and your resources ready. One of the best options would be not to deploy it because protesters left on their own. So I was still hopeful because the letter hadn't been delivered yet.
Right. So by 7:06 p.m., what was your final decision?
That we would be, if needed, if the letter was not successful, that we would be launching the next morning our operational plan.
Now, this is the paragraph that you made the correction when we began today's examination. And the correction you made was to the effect that it was your decision.
Yes.
As opposed to a decision made by the strategic leadership.
Correct.
Why is that important to you?
Because all those decisions moving forward in regards to Windsor and the plan, they were all my decisions.
Okay. So after this decision was made at 8 p.m., if we go down the page, at 8 p.m., the letter that was previously approved was now signed by Minister Jones, and it was distributed to the protesters. What effect, if any, did it have, that distribution of the letter?
Very little. Very little. It was disappointing.
And
Very little.
and tell us about what was going on by then with the protesters.
Well, because of the time of day, we had seen this throughout the week. That was kind of the heavier times for numbers of people. Somewhat, I would describe as a party atmosphere was happening from usually 8 o'clock on during the evenings, and this was no different. So the party atmosphere had certainly began. Again, it was just very disappointing that the letter had little effect. Although I appreciated all the efforts getting the letter.
That wasn't what you were hoping for.
No.
So now was it time to escalate up the letter?
Yes.
Okay. So that takes us to the end of the day on the 11th. My colleague, Mr. Commissioner, Ms. Hedarali will continue the examination with the events the following day.
Okay, thank you. Is this a good time for the morning break and we can come back in 15 minutes?
It would be.
Okay, so we'll take the morning break, come back in 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
The commission is in recess for 15 minutes. La commission est levée pour 15 minutes. Order allowed. The commission is reconvened. La commission reprend.
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, Superintendent Early.
Good morning.
My name is Sajida Hidarali. I'm Commission Counsel, and I will be asking you some questions this morning.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to continue where my colleague left off on February 11th. A lot of things happened that day. On that day, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice also granted an injunction prohibiting a blockade on the Ambassador Bridge. Can you explain briefly how you used this injunction and if you found it helpful in clearing the blockade?
The injunction was another tool that could be considered by myself and my team. We also made sure that the injunction was included in the media strategy so that everyone was aware that it existed. And so that's how it was used. I saw it as a tool.
I'd like to pull up your notes, please, at OPP 40s 4551. If we go down to page 9, there is a note at 4:58 p.m. that says protesters are getting ready to leave now that injunction stands. Intel from crowd. What was the source of this intelligence?
That was coming from some of the officers from the front line, as well as perhaps and I can't recall exactly, but it was being discussed amongst the crowd.
And so it says that protesters are getting ready to leave. Did some leave because of the injunction?
Very little, if any at all, I can't recall.
On February 11th, there was also a province-wide emergency declared by Premier Ford under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. How did that impact the blockade?
Again, we used it as part of our media strategy. We made sure that people were aware that what it meant to them if you were protesting. We actually did up information pamphlets for the crowd that explained some of the consequences of the act and had provincial liaison teams distribute those. But again, some did leave as a result, others did not.
Did you find that one of these two tools, the emergency measures or the injunction, was more or less useful than the other? Did they work in conjunction? Can you just explain a little more?
I would say they worked in conjunction, and as I've mentioned several times, the situation being so dynamic that a lot of options are useful, and so I saw both of them as tools, as options for us.
Great. So we talked a little bit earlier about resources that were necessary for the plan to be implemented on the 12th.
Yes.
One of the things that the plan required is towing capacity.
Yes.
Is that correct? So where did you obtain tow trucks?
So towing was included in our traffic plan, and knowing that we may have to have an action of operation and remove vehicles, that obviously had to be considered. Windsor Police Service has a contract with a local towing company who made their tow trucks available. And also because we weren't sure the exact numbers of what would need to be towed, we had the option of tow trucks come in from Detroit.
So first, for the local company that
Yes.
the Windsor Police Service had a contract with, was there any issues with their willingness to assist in the context of the protests?
No, there was not.
And as for the tow trucks that came from Detroit, I'd like to pull up WPS 501090, please. This is an email from Chief Menuzzo to Deputy Chief Belair that forwards an email from the Michigan government. In there, we see that Michigan doesn't have state resources to offer, but are willing to put the Windsor Police Service in touch with private contractors. And as you can see, Chief Inuzu says they have no machinery or tow trucks to offer. Please let the team know there is no assistance in tow trucks or machinery from the US. Were you made aware of the fact that the state didn't have tow trucks to offer?
Not that specific detail, but I do know that the inspector in charge of the traffic and towing plan had made connections with perhaps the contractors that they mentioned to arrange for tow trucks to be on standby.
And when did you obtain the tow trucks from Michigan?
They came, I believe they came the morning of the 12th.
And I understand that they weren't used in the end.
Correct.
When did they leave?
That day.
I understand that the blockade was only cleared on the following day.
That's correct.
Why were the trucks sent back to the US if the blockade wasn't cleared yet?
The area that we were able to clear on the 12th was significant, was more than we anticipated. And so the area that we needed to continue to clear on the 13th did not have a large amount of vehicles. So we were confident that the tow company from Windsor would be able to support what we needed.
As for other resources that were required, I understand that you also arranged for road barriers to hold areas that were cleared.
That's correct.
What did you get to use as road barriers? What kind of resources?
Windsor Police were able to use their, obviously the connections with the city to use large trucks. And as well, they had a certain amount of cement barriers that were available to them. And then we worked through our partnership with MTO to work with one of their contractors to bring in more cement barriers.
Were there any issues in securing any of these resources?
No.
So we also talked earlier about the officers that you needed to carry out the plan. I understand there were frontline officers, POUs, etc. I understand that you also had RCMP POU officers.
Correct.
Do you know how many RCMP officers were deployed in Windsor?
I'd have to refer to my notes, but I believe it was a POU team consisting of approximately 40, and then an additional, they send their emergency response teams with their POU. So I think there was an additional 10 there. And then we also had assistance from the RCMP officers that assisted on the front line as well.
Do you know where the RCMP officers came from?
No, I did meet some of them, and they were from all over, really.
I'd like to pull up doj.ir.6011, please. At page 55. Point 250, if we scroll down a little bit. There's a note that on February 10th, the Windsor Police Service contacted the Minister of Public Safety to request RCMP assistant with respect to the Ambassador Bridge.
Slow down a bit for the translators, please.
That same day, the RCMP deployed a TSG that was deployed in Ottawa to Windsor. I understand that the TSG is a tactical support group. To your knowledge, is that the unit that came to Windsor?
I'm not sure. I couldn't comment on that.
We can pull that out, Mr. Clerk. Thank you. I understand that OPP also deployed PLT
Correct.
members to Windsor. One of the recommendations that you made in your witness summary is that there should be a PLT unit in the Windsor Police Service, and PLT training should be provided to Windsor police officers. Could you please expand on why you made that recommendation?
the efforts and the achievements of our provincial liaison team, not only in Windsor, but any incident that they attend is remarkable. The community, as well as our organization, we have a responsibility to try to develop that rapport in incidents where we don't see eye to eye, just so that everybody can be heard. And the provincial liaison team allows that to happen within our different groups within our societies and our communities. And so that's why I would urge that any really police service have some sort of team that allows for that rapport and that communication piece.
Would you make a similar recommendation regarding POU training, that all municipal forces perhaps should have that sort of training?
I think depending on where the municipal service is and any key infrastructures that may be targeted, that has to be consideration. And if, in fact, they can't have a team, perhaps they need to have some sort of memorandum of understanding with another service that could facilitate a POU unit for them if needed.
So you mentioned earlier today to my colleague that by the end of February 11th, you had all the resources that you needed for
Correct.
your plan, and that you implemented it on the morning of February 12th. I understand that one of the reasons that it started early in the morning is that there would be fewer protesters and that no children were likely to be present according to intelligence.
Correct.
Did you have a contingency plan in place in case there were indeed children present?
Yes, we did. So we had a vehicle set aside that would transport children from the scene. We also worked with the local Children's Aid Society for assistance, and as well, Windsor kind of spearheaded this, but they had their victim response unit in attendance to support any children that may be present.
And so while we're on the contingency plan, can you explain the importance of having those kinds of plans in place and how you decide what to prepare for as contingencies?
Mhm. So as I've discussed before, you need to have as many options as possible, especially in an incident like this. And so once you learn of, or once you have developed that situational awareness and some of the challenges that you may be faced with during the incident, you need to make sure that your options are covered for each one. So for example, you mentioned traffic. Well, that includes towing as well. And so did the POU plan. Knowing that children were present at different times of the day during this protest, that was an obvious thing for me to make sure that it was addressed.
So we're on the morning of February 12th, you start implementing the plan.
Correct.
Please explain how the plan was carried out.
We had a very early morning briefing, which included every team member that was going to be involved. So that would be all of our POU contingent, as well as the frontline officers, as well as the admin support. The plan was explained to everyone. I addressed everyone and thanked them for their support and efforts. It was shortly after that that we then staged at the areas that were set out in the plan. Before the plan was to move forward, PLT was to again address the crowd and let them know that with POU standing behind them, let them know that POU would be attempting to clear the area and giving them another opportunity to leave the area on their own. Another important part of the plan is that we always left an area open so that if somebody wanted to leave the operational area while POU was present, they could do so on their own.
I'd like to pull up COM 50926, please, Mr. Clerk. This is a map of Windsor and will maybe help explain the clearing by phases that you briefly alluded to earlier.
Okay.
Perhaps explain more visually how it happened.
Yes.
So you explained earlier today that the plan was to clear the protesters in phases because the area was perhaps too large to do it all at once.
Yes.
Can you explain a little further what the phases were and how they were carried out.
Mhm. It's a bit difficult to see the side roads. Okay. So right in behind the McDonald's is obviously where the bridge is. So we wanted to go from the bridge to the intersection to the train tracks. So there's train tracks right in front of the entrance to the bridge. That was a certain area that we then wanted to move from the tracks itself to the intersection at the McDonald's there, since that's a clear point. That would be another section, and then ultimately make our way down to Tecumseh Road. So that it was basically put into 3 different sections. Those were determined by the POU plan and the POU team leaders in regards to what would be most effective. And obviously I respected and trusted their subject matter expertise.
And I understand that after each area was cleared, you would use the resources that we discussed earlier to block passage.
Correct. So we would use a mixture of the larger trucks, the cement barriers, and officers as well.
Then once the whole area was cleared after the 3 phases were completed, that brought us to February 13th.
Yes.
And that's when the traffic plan came into place. Is that right?
Correct.
Can you explain a little more what the traffic plan in itself entailed?
Yes. So the traffic plan was to, as I said to my team that day, it's one thing to open the bridge, it's another thing to keep it open. So the traffic plan, the traffic and towing plan addressed maintaining the safe flow of traffic to and from the United States. So the traffic plan incorporated the cement barriers that we discussed and blocking all the intersections, and I won't say all, but most of the intersections down here on Church, to ensure that we did not have protesters coming from the side streets onto the road again and taking it back. The infrastructure of Windsor is a huge challenge when it comes to the entrance of the bridge, and that's why the need for all the resources that were required in regards to the cement barriers. This traffic plan also had marked areas that intersections were attended by officers rather than cement barriers for safety reasons, for EMS and fire, to make sure that they could get through. And then also we incorporated 2 different areas for pedestrian traffic as well.
Were local residents able to cross Huron Church at any point with their personal vehicles?
Yes, no, they weren't at certain times, but at the towards the end, towards EC Row in that area, they were able to cross into the other side of the city. Again, another big part of the traffic plan was the media strategy. So we made sure that we communicated this to the community at every step of the way, what it looked like, what the alternate routes were to the different businesses, to the different areas of the city. We made sure that all of those were set up as well. And Windsor Police had obviously a big hand in that, working with their roads department.
This is, I think, what Deputy Chief Crawley yesterday referred to as an area of control.
Yes.
And I think you referred to it in your interview as an exclusion zone.
Yes.
Under which authority did you create the exclusion zone?
We relied on the criminal code, really for keeping people out of the area. We had specific tasks for the officers that were assigned to the traffic plan to investigate anybody who may appear suspicious or who may stop in the exclusion zone. So it was clearly communicated to the community through MTO signs, through social media, that if you were going to be on Huron Church, you're going to the bridge.
And I understand that there were RCMP frontline resources that
Yes.
arrived, as you mentioned a little earlier.
Yes.
And I also understand that there was a delay in swearing them in. Is that
Yes, if it ever happened at all. I don't think it did happen.
And why was it necessary to swear in these officers, or what would it have been useful?
Well, they would be able to address anything under the criminal code, but anything under provincial or municipal legislation, they would not be able to address. And since they were being deployed to assist the front line, we needed them to have those options. So what we did instead, because of the delay, is that we made sure that they were partnered with another police service, so OPP or Windsor, that did have those abilities.
And it's one of the recommendations that you also made in your interview, that the process for granting RCMP officers provincial and municipal authorities be streamlined.
Yes.
What was the difficulty in getting them sworn in?
I don't think there was really clear direction as to who had to do it, when did it have to be done, could it be done remotely, did it have to be done with them in person? So there was a lot of phone calls back and forth with myself along with Windsor Police Service at a time where really we should have just been left alone to focus on the incident itself. So that's what I mean by more streamlined before our CMP officers arrived to assist.
And did it cause any delay that you had to change your plan to pair RCMP officers with OPP or Windsor Police Service officers?
No, we just looked for a different option because obviously we needed them on the front line. So that's what we did instead.
Right, so if we go to the next day on February 14th, the Emergencies Act was invoked by the federal government.
Yes.
In your view, did it have any impact on the situation in Windsor?
Well, things were much different then because the traffic was flowing, and it's hard to say if it had any difference, but I do know that, again, it was communicated through our media strategy that people were aware of the additional act being legislated and what it meant to them, and the definition that of certain things, obviously a bridge that fell under the act.
Yesterday, Deputy Chief Crowley mentioned that it may have been dissuasive to the protesters to come
return.
back. Would you agree?
I agree. Mhm. Again, it was another tool that we were able to use.
Was there a clear plan that you were aware of that the protesters wanted to reblockade the Ambassador Bridge after it was cleared on the 12th and the 13th?
Yes, we continued to observe and receive intelligence that indicated, I think it was on the date of, and I know it's in my notes, on the date of the 15th or the 16th, there was a Facebook posting that was called Take Back the Bridge. And it was associated to all the things that were then transpiring in Ottawa. And basically the posts were saying, all the police are gone to Ottawa, so let's take back the bridge. That's something that we watched very closely. Also, Windsor Police had a group of protesters on a regular basis, and I think Deputy Chief Crowley spoke to that would meet during the convoys on a regular basis. So we maintained kind of intelligence on, what will that group bring. But certainly there was the fear that they would think that numbers were being deployed to Ottawa and then try to take advantage of that and take back the bridge.
I think your notes, and I can put them up, if that would be helpful, also mention that once the injunction is expired, they are looking to block it again.
Yes.
Was that also a consideration, that the injunction was going to expire?
Yes, there was intelligence that indicated that that's what they were considering.
So did you think that the renewal of the injunction on February 18th was helpful in preventing that?
Well, to those who, were going to try to take it back after it expired, yes.
So as of February 20th, I understand that you adopted a demobilization plan.
Correct.
What is a demobilization plan?
It was a plan to obviously demobilize our resources, not only for officers, but just kind of to give the incident entirely to Windsor Police Service as soon as they could kind of sustain it themselves. Also keeping in mind and respecting the fact of that they had calls for service, they had a city to police as well. So we did it in a staged approach. It also included demobilizing certain areas of the traffic plan. So on a daily basis, sometimes on a, an hourly basis, we would monitor the traffic flow along with the intelligence, along with the reports from our provincial liaison team and what the front line was seeing to see if there was areas we could perhaps remove some of the barriers. So we evaluated that constantly and opened intersections a point at a time. You can see in the demobilization plan that we actually had some dates set out for each intersection to be considered. Some of those dates were met. Other dates were actually opened intersections earlier than we anticipated.
Maybe for the record, we could put it up. It's WPS 60719. I believe at page 4. Perhaps scroll down a little bit. Is this what you were referring to?
That's correct.
So I see that the latest potential reopening date is March 13th.
Yes.
Why would it take about 3 weeks to clear all the intersections?
That was sort of kind of a review of based on the information we had when the plan was created. The last two intersections were the heavier intersections in regards to protests, and those are the two that are obviously closest to the bridge entrance. So that's why they were kind of put till the end to see how the community as well as the intel and all of that what we're receiving to see how the other intersections were being cleared. Was it being received well? Did we have any other threat of a protest? So that's why it was kind of spanned along that amount of time.
Do you know when they were ultimately reopened, the last intersection?
I don't, sorry.
I understand you stopped being critical incident commander in Windsor on February 23rd.
That's correct.
How was the transition of command from yourself to the Windsor Police Service?
Again, it was seamless, and we worked every day, every night, side by side. So really, it was seamless when we left. We just wanted to make sure that Windsor had the proper amount of resources to be able to deal with anything if it should occur. And of course, some of our officers remain there until the end of the month, end of February.
I'd like to take you back to another of your recommendations before we end. You mentioned that the critical incident commander should visit frontline officers and ask them what they need.
Mhm.
I understand that that's something that you did,
I did, yes.
Windsor.
Yes.
Is this uncommon?
I think that every critical incident commander attempts to go on ground. It's just because of, again, the dynamic situation. It's not always easy to do. So once I had an opportunity, I did make a point of visiting the different checkpoints to check on the wellness of our members. And when I say our members, I mean any police officer that was out there. I also asked them for their input if there's anything else that we needed to get done or that we could do better. It was from one of those visits that the interactive post in regards to the traffic plan and updating on a regular basis, it came from a frontline officer saying, I'm dealing with a local resident who wasn't sure where the crosswalks were. So could we post it and keep it up to date? So I took that right back to the command post and made sure that that was done right away so that a member of the public at any time just could click on the link and know where to cross the road. So it's those things as well. And most importantly, it's a way to thank them for their efforts. Considering that a lot of them had been away from home for quite some time and know that their efforts were having an impact.
This is the last document that I'll take you to today. If we could please put up OPP 404552 at page 26. Those are the scribe notes from February 13th. At 12:17, so if we can scroll down a little bit. Commissioner Karik thanked you for having performed to perfection on world stage. What for you made the Windsor operation such a success?
The team, absolutely the team. It was a remarkable collaboration and cooperation. It didn't matter what uniform you were wearing, what rank you were, what role you had. It was a tremendous effort by a remarkable team.
Is there anything else that you would like to say to the commission that we haven't asked you this morning?
I don't think so at this point. Thank you.
Those are my questions for you, Superintendent. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So I'd like to first call on the Government of Canada. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, Superintendent.
Good morning.
My name is Andrea Gonzalez, and I'm one of the lawyers representing the Government of Canada in this inquiry. I just want to begin by going back to the information you received. I guess it was late, you had many late nights, late night on February 9th, as to the state of play in Windsor when you were assigned the role of critical incident commander. In response to questions from Commission Counsel, you'll recall that he pulled up the bullet point email that you sent to the two deputies.
Yes.
One of the concerns that was raised with you early on, I gather, was the dynamics of the crowd that was engaged in the protest activity, right?
Yes.
Under your direction, PLT teams became engaged early on trying to identify leaders, right?
Yes.
But as you understood from the PLT teams, the protesters were disjointed and disorganized, I think were your words, right?
Yes, correct.
In this kind of a situation, police don't know whether the group will even listen to someone who puts themselves forward as a leader, right?
That's correct, especially in this instance because nobody was really being identified as a leader.
Right, and there was, I understand you spoke about the three groups. There was some infighting among them.
Yes.
And the demands of the group, to the extent they were even known, were problematic.
Yes.
Right, I think I saw in your notes of February 10th at OPP 404543 that the protesters had no desire to leave and wanted to remain until all restrictions were lifted. That was your understanding?
Yes.
Your bullet point note to the deputy chiefs also talked about the crowd being agitated, and that was true at various times through the protest, right?
That's correct.
In your notes, again, February 10th, I saw that you described a wilder crowd arriving at night.
Yes.
That's when the drinking and the pot smoking would begin.
Yes.
Yes. And Inspector Yunin described it, the crowd dynamics as being violent. You remember that?
Yes.
We heard evidence from Deputy Chief Crawley yesterday, but I just want to confirm you were also aware from the briefings you received that there had been threats to surround and storm police station.
Yes, as well as the tunnel.
The tunnel, right? Officers were swarmed when they tried to arrest the individual whose car jumped the curb.
That's correct.
There had been threats when attempts were made to tow two vehicles prior to your arrival.
Yes.
You heard about a possible protest at the Windsor Airport.
That I did not.
Okay.
No.
You heard about a smoke bomb that was set off by demonstrators at one point.
Yes.
And a bit later on in the piece, but there was a bomb threat called in about a bomb that was behind the police lines. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There had also been threats made to the mayor. His address was posted online. You knew about that.
Yes, I was aware.
And this was all you would accurately say, or you'd say it was accurately described as a volatile situation.
Yes.
Then you throw into the mix the presence of children, right?
Correct.
One of your biggest concerns throughout the piece.
Yes.
And I take it that the concern about the presence of children was based on what officers were seeing actually happening on the ground at the protest site, right?
That's correct.
Not just information being collected online.
No, we were witnessing it.
You were witnessing it. Yesterday, in questions to Deputy Chief Crawley, one of the counsel for one of the parties pulled up a situation report that was dated 0400 hours that indicated no children were observed on scene. That was 0400 hours on February 12th. Can you explain how that reconciles, if it does, with the information you received of children on site?
So it was always very apparent that the children on site were at certain times in the day and that they were not staying overnight. So the information at 0400, the children were not present, did not surprise me because information before revealed that the children were going home at night and not returning till sometimes 9, 10 a.m.
Okay. You also spoke, you testified in response to questions from Commission Counsel about the increased risk of counter protests,
Yes.
right? And the president of the Auto Workers Association, who understandably they were quite upset by the ongoing blockade of the bridge. Do you recall the words that he used when he indicated that they wanted to come and counter protest?
I believe, and I think it was recorded in my notes, something indicating that they were going to knock heads or use a vehicle to push people into the river.
Yeah, that was on February 11th, OPP 404550, page 21. He said that they intend to come on Monday with 1,000 people to crack heads or bring heavy equipment and push them in the river. That's pretty concerning as the critical incident commander, correct?
Yes.
And as time wore on, local residents are becoming more vocal in their opposition to the protest. I understand you were briefed at one point on counter protesters intending to damage protest vehicles.
Yes.
All that. You spoke about the injunction that was ordered by Chief Justice Morowitz of the Ontario Superior Court on February 11th. And I understand your view is that although this was one of the tools available, it was not particularly useful.
I did not see a significant change in the incident.
Similarly, the February 11th provincial declaration of a state of emergency, I understand from your notes that a few protesters may have left, but it also caused others to dig their heels in, right?
That's correct.
And then the third piece that happens on February 11th is the letter from the Solicitor General to Commissioner Carrick that was distributed to protesters. And I just want to confirm, you testified in response to Commission Counsel's questions that you had been made aware of a similar letter that would be handed out to protesters in Ottawa. You recall that evidence?
Yes.
Did you understand who that letter would be coming from?
The one in Ottawa?
Yes.
No, I do not. I do not know.
And that's because your focus, of course,
Was Windsor.
was Windsor.
Yes.
And that letter from the Solicitor General does ultimately get handed out to protesters at the blockade site in Windsor.
Yes.
And it had no effect either. They refused to leave, right?
Yes.
Disappointingly, but that really proved to be the end point to possible engagement. It had been tried and it had failed, right?
Mhm.
Sorry, we just need
Yes.
audible.
Sorry.
Thank you. And there was a lot going on across the province at the time that you were dealing with the situation in Windsor, a lot of protest activity, fair?
Yes.
We know that the Windsor police response involved units not only from OPP and Windsor Police, but you also spoke about London, Hamilton, Waterloo, I think.
Correct.
Perhaps some other municipal police services, or does that cover it?
I believe that covers it.
And you were told that Windsor was your priority, right?
Yes.
But you were certainly well aware that there were ongoing and expected demonstrations and blockades across the province, right?
Yes, I was aware.
I saw through your notes this reference to a ripple effect. Am I understanding, Superintendent, that you saw the convoys and the blockades in the various locations as being connected in the sense that they couldn't be managed or approached in isolation from a policing perspective?
Certainly, all of them had to be considered. I think I'll go back to the example of the Facebook page that I mentioned, to Take Back the Bridge. It was obvious that people were monitoring what police activity was and then making plans according to that.
And you were aware or certainly alive to the concern that what happened at one site could well have impacts at others,
Correct.
right? Now, after the 11th, everything, fair to say, had been tried and the time had come for the operational plan to be implemented, right?
Yes.
And it ultimately succeeds in fully clearing that blockade on Sunday the 13th, right?
Correct.
The vehicles were towed. One thing I didn't hear come out in your evidence in chief, but I saw in your notes, OPP 404544 at page 14, that bomb threats had been made to the tow operator. That was AM, PM towing, is that right?
Yes, Windsor Police Service was dealing with that because it was their jurisdiction, but I was aware that the towing company had received threats, both internally, so on their phone, and also to that a number of people had called continuously to the business, and so basically their phone service wasn't available because people kept tying up the lines. And in regards to tow trucks, when the others were staged from the States, we also received information that protesters were going to go and block the area where we had them staged so that we potentially were not able to use them. So I had to assign additional officers to that area.
Okay. It's fair for me to say that even after the operation had successfully cleared the blockade, you were deeply concerned about maintaining that road clear, right?
Yes,
That was your single biggest concern, in fact, was maintaining the hold, somewhat precarious hold on Huron Church Road, right?
yes.
And I saw in your notes, perhaps we could turn them up, OPP 404556 at page, it's stamped page 16, but I think in the electronic document, it would be page 17. Yep, right there is good. And I see fourth line down. Now we have to maintain it, may have Groundhog Day, could be Groundhog Day, have to be on high alert. What did you mean by it could be Groundhog Day?
They could attempt again. They had obviously proven to the world at this time that they were able to block it so that they knew it was achievable.
And this ongoing risk that the protesters would return and resume the blockade. I take it that your concern was informed not only by what you saw in Windsor, but your experience with these ongoing slow roll protests, even going back to January.
Yes.
And as the POU operation loomed in Ottawa, you made clear that you couldn't spare resources from Windsor to assist with that, right?
I made it clear that I needed a contingent of POU officers still available.
And in fact, after the blockade was cleared on the 13th and the bridge reopened on the 14th, I understand there were threats to block the tunnel. Those threats came in very shortly after the bridge was cleared.
Yes.
You mentioned the 15th, there was a convoy of vehicles believed to have been traveling to Windsor that was intercepted.
Yes.
On the 16th, if we could pull up OPP 50209. And scroll down, please. Just pausing there. This is an email dated February 16th, and we see your name there, Superintendent.
Yes.
Okay, keep scrolling down. And this is an email communicating to you and others the most recent updated PLT messaging that incorporates both the federal and provincial emergency orders. You recall receiving that?
I received a lot of emails, but yes.
But you're aware in any event of the needing to get out PLT messaging of the two levels of emergency orders, right?
Yes.
Including what we see in the first paragraph in black, persons traveling to any other unlawful protest sites to participate in or support the unlawful demonstration can be charged. And that is the PLT messaging being put out to deter protesters from going to sites where blockades might be resumed or renewed, yes?
Yes, and providing them the education of what could happen.
Right, what the consequences are,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
So you also mentioned the Facebook chat about protesters heading back to Ambassador Bridge as the enforcement action was taking place in Ottawa.
Yes.
Let's just pull up OPP 404558. I've come to learn this is what we call fast facts.
Yes.
And this is pages 92 and 93. Let's just start at 92. Scroll down, please. A little bit more. There we go. The bullet point towards the bottom of the page, private chat on Facebook by a group by the name of Windsor Convoy for Freedom. Quote, all police are in Ottawa, so let's take the bridge back.
Yes.
That was a concern. And there's another one on the next page. I don't have to take you there. And of course, Superintendent, you testified before about the concern of the presented by counter protesters, the volatility if we have these two sides colliding, right?
Yes.
And that concern also would have arisen if yet another blockade popped up in Windsor after it had been cleared, right?
Absolutely.
And it's because of these concerns that you planned for the gradual rather than the sort of immediate demobilization in Windsor, right?
That's correct.
In fact, OPP POUs were not removed from Windsor until February 24th, as I understand it.
Yes.
And that's, you understand, that's after the federal government had revoked the invocation of the Emergencies Act.
Yes.
We saw in your response to questions from Commission Council, the last intersection was planned to reopen on March 13th on your advice.
Yes.
And I understand from Deputy Chief Crowley that WPS maintained a perimeter as late as March 28th. You understand that, or you said you weren't sure?
Yeah, I wasn't there, but I did hear it in his testimony.
And given all of the concerns and the economic impact of that bridge being closed down, not only in Windsor, but in the entire region, you understood that it would be appropriately prudent and cautious to keep these measures in place long after it had been cleared, correct?
Again, it was another tool that we could refer to if we had issues.
Because when that blockade was cleared on the 13th or the 14th, you just had no idea whether it would fall into the hands of protesters again, right?
Exactly.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Citizens for Freedom, JCCF.
Good morning, Superintendent.
Good morning.
My name is Alan Honor. I'm a lawyer with the Democracy Fund, and we share standing with the JCCF and Citizens for Freedom. Superintendent Early, since this inquiry started, we've heard evidence about the importance of police independence and about how politicians should not interfere with that independence. You will agree with me that police autonomy is very important.
Yes.
And can we pull up ssm.can.nsc.402845? And Superintendent, you will not have seen this document before, but it's a readout of a conversation between the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario on February 10th. I just want to take you to parts of that document and then ask you a question about it. So can we scroll down just a little bit more? So if we look at this document now, the Premier and the Prime Minister are saying hello. And in the first big paragraph, Premier Ford says, the bigger one for us and the country is the Ambassador Bridge and the state ground there. What I think is we got to stop the spread of these protests. And he goes on to say that the Attorney General is looking at legal ways to give the police more tools. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and in the next paragraph, if we can just scroll down a little bit, the Prime Minister says, first of all, they're not a legal protest. They're occupying a municipal street and are not legally parked. You shouldn't need more tools, legal tools. They are barricading the Ontario economy. And then later in that paragraph, he says, we got to respond quickly. And if I can take you to the next page, about halfway through, just from what you're seeing on the screen, the third paragraph from the bottom, the Prime Minister asks, has Windsor asked anything of the OPP? Have they made a formal request? And if you look at the Premier's response, he says, they've put that request in through the Solicitor General. I spoke to the Mayor, and that was the plan. You see that?
Yes.
And can we go to the top of the third page? And so we see the Prime Minister is asking, what are the next steps? And Premier Ford says, they'll act, but without directing them, it's hard to describe their game plan. They'll have a plan, unlike Ottawa, where they didn't have a plan. I'll get briefed tomorrow from the Solicitor General and we'll keep you updated. This is critical. I hear you. I'll be up their ass with a wire brush. Now, Superintendent, the question I wanted to put to you is, and I just want to be clear, you did not experience any political interference from anyone when you were carrying out your duties as the critical incident commander.
No, I did not.
And do you know of anyone else in the OPS, the OPP, the WPS, or any other police force who experienced inappropriate political pressure?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to just switch gears for a moment here. You told us earlier today about a conversation, telephone conversation you had with, I believe it was Deputy Commissioners Harkins and DeMarco, and that was on February the 10th. And you told us today that they told you that Windsor was your priority and that it was a priority.
Yes.
And when I read your witness statement, I saw you said that. You described it as a priority, but you also described it in a different way. I won't take you there, but what you say in that statement is that they told you that Windsor was the priority. Does that sound right to you?
I knew it was stressed on me that it was a priority.
And was it the priority as opposed to a priority?
All I can speak to is that I knew it was my priority.
But you would agree with me that it was a very important priority,
Yes.
regardless of whether it was the most important.
Yes.
And given the economic impact of the Ambassador Bridge, it was possibly not just one of the most important priorities for Ontario, but also for the country.
Perhaps, but there was a lot of other issues that we had to consider.
Right, but we saw from the conversation between Doug Ford and Prime Minister Trudeau that at least for Doug Ford, it appears that Windsor is the priority.
Well, I can't speak to that. I wasn't involved in that
No, but
conversation.
you've seen the document. That's what it looks like when he says, for us. I'll just remind you of the language here. He says, the bigger one for us and the country is the Ambassador Bridge.
I can't speak to what he was thinking.
Okay, fair enough. Superintendent Early, you can tell me though, that, and to the credit of you and your team, that you managed to get this blockade at the Ambassador Bridge cleared within 2 days of your appointment as CIC.
Yes.
And you would agree with me then that you and your team managed to resolve one of the most urgent priorities in the country without the benefit of the Emergencies Act.
Correct.
Thank you. Earlier today, you spoke about swearing in RCMP officers.
Yes.
I think your evidence was that the POU officers did not need to be sworn in because they were enforcing the criminal code, but frontline officers would be enforcing municipal laws and provincial laws?
Possibly.
Possibly. And so you sort of creatively solved this problem by pairing them up with OPP officers.
And Windsor Police.
And Windsor Police.
Yes.
And I just don't understand this. I'm just wondering if you can explain it a little bit better. What additional power would that confer on the RCMP, or what benefit would that confer to Paramount like that?
In regards to having them sworn in?
Right. I mean, would this allow the RCMP, for example, to enforce provincial laws, or?
Yes.
It would.
Yes.
Thank you. And we heard today that you established an exclusion zone along Huron Church Road. And I believe we heard yesterday that exclusion zone was north of Tecumseh to the Ambassador Bridge. Does that sound right?
Yes.
And that's a distance of about 1 kilometer?
I believe it's more than that. I think it's about 3.
Okay. And when you gave us evidence today, you said you relied upon the criminal code to establish that exclusion zone?
Yes.
Do you agree that you could have also relied upon the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act to establish that exclusion zone?
Yes.
Thank you. My friend from the Government of Canada asked you questions today about threats that were present in Windsor. You told us today that you've read the Hendon reports.
Yes.
Insofar as they concerned the municipalities under your care.
Yes.
And you would agree with me that in Windsor there was no extremist rhetoric.
That I can't speak to.
But if it was in the Hendon reports, you would agree with it.
Yes, I mean, it was Windsor's responsibility to be reviewing the Hendon reports in regards to activity in their area.
Okay, well, it's OPP 401688. I won't bring it up. Let me just move on. Can we pull up OPP 403038? Can you tell us who Karen Johnson was or is?
Well, the document.
I'm just asking while we're waiting for
Oh,
the
okay.
document.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with that name.
Well, we have an email here, and when it comes up, I suspect it will show an email from Karen Johnson to a number of people, including you and Commissioner Carrique.
Mhm.
And can we just scroll down a little bit, please? A little bit further. Scroll up. Okay, this is not the document I'm looking for. Let me ask you a question, though.
Okay.
Would you agree with me that there were a total of 44 arrests in Windsor during this enforcement phase?
Yeah, I do believe that that was, again, the arrests were the responsibility of Windsor Police Service.
Right, and from what I recall, and you can just tell me if this is accurate or not, there were 88 charges approximately, and almost all of those were, about 44 were mischief and about 44 were breaching a court order.
I believe so.
And none of those are violent offenses.
Pardon?
Those two offenses are not violent offenses.
Right.
Thank you.
They can be. Everybody has, there's a potential of violence in any offense, really.
But if somebody was to commit a violent offense, they would typically be charged with something like assault or assault with a weapon.
Yes,
or assault
perhaps.
causing
It all
bodily
depends
harm.
on the reasonable and probable grounds.
Right, kidnapping,
exist.
forcible confinement,
Right.
murder, none of that. I'm just about to wrap up here. I just want to ask a question about maintaining the roads, because you told my friend that maintaining the roads was a priority, and you said to your officers that clearing the bridge is one thing, but maintaining the road is another thing. And I understand you were able to maintain the road. You're speaking about here on Church Road.
Yes,
Is that right? And you were able to maintain it by installing jersey barriers along the side of the road from the bridge to the 401,
correct. Not exactly right to the 401, but
but
yes,
approximately.
yes.
And that's
Other-
a distance of 3 kilometers, I think.
Okay, that could be. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I'm not sure about the distances. We used other ways as well, the cement barriers along with officers deployed to the certain traffic stops too.
Right, and you had a traffic plan that you employed when you were doing that, right?
Correct.
And that traffic plan, I won't bring it up. I think I'm out of time,
Okay.
or very close to it. It was dated February 13th, 2022.
You
Yes.
have a couple of minles.
Oh, I
You're not near your time. I'll look at you when when you're close to it.
Well, I'll wrap up anyway and try and get some goodwill. Superintendent Early, I take it it's obvious that if the traffic plan is dated February 13th, 2022, it was not contemplating the use of emergent powers conferred by the Emergencies Act.
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is the City of Windsor.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Early.
Good afternoon.
I have a few topics I'd like to canvass with you today.
Okay.
I am Jennifer King. I'm counsel to the City of Windsor. First, I'd like to speak to you about your role in Windsor before Deputy Commissioner Chris Harkins appointed you to serve as OPP's Critical Incident Commander in Windsor. This morning, you told my friend, Commission Counsel, that OPP PLT was deployed to Windsor on February the 8th, following a conversation you had with now Deputy Chief Crowley early on February the 8th. I think it was 2 a.m.
Yes.
Yes. It is my understanding from the OPP's institutional report, and perhaps I'll stop there. Have you had an opportunity to review OPP's institutional report?
Yes.
So I understand from OPP's institutional report, and for the record, it is OPP IR 701. I don't think we have to bring it up, Mr. Clerk. But at page 27, it says that 4 OPP PLT officers were deployed on February the 7th to assist the WPS. This is reflected in some of the documents, and I could show them to you if it could help you confirm for us and for the commissioner the date that OPP PLT were deployed.
I know it was in between those 2 days. As you can see, I lost track of time sometimes, or when the date changed because I was up till all hours.
Yes.
But I know that PLT was deployed.
Okay. Well, why don't we look at, perhaps Mr. Clerk, you could bring up OPP 404580 and scroll to page 67. Superintendent Early, Commissioner Carrique produced texts with Deputy Solicitor General D. Tomaso that have been produced to the Commission. Commissioner Carrique was kept apprised of the operations in Windsor, right?
Yes.
Yes. And so these are his texts with Deputy Solicitor General D. Tomaso. And if you go to page 67, at the bottom of the page, Mr. Clerk. The times on this, so we have to go back, I believe it's 5 hours. Around noon on February the 7th, Commissioner Creek texted the Deputy Solicitor General, OPP, PLT engaged. Do you see that?
Yes.
And would he have gotten that information from you? This is February 7th, before you were appointed, correct?
So I don't know if he received it from myself or from the chief or perhaps Acting Superintendent Marcel Baudin.
Okay. There are other documents that refer to PLT being engaged by February the 7th. Does this assist you in confirming for the commissioner the date that OPP PLT were engaged?
I know that the discussion was had that they would go and attend and assist.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense to you that would have been February the 7th based on
Yes.
this. Okay, thank you. You spoke with my friend, Mr. Au, about Mayor Dilkin's public announcement that you said you watched on February the 9th.
Yeah, I don't remember watching it, but I was certainly aware of it.
Okay, so do you remember whether or not you heard about it or whether you saw it yourself?
I had heard about it.
And it was on February the 9th?
Yes.
Okay. You were not yet appointed?
No.
No? The mayor and Chief Mizuno, former Chief Mizuno of the Windsor Police Service, held a press conference at noon on February the 9th. I don't have to bring it up, but there's documents about that press conference. Does it make sense to you? This was something that you would have heard around
Yes.
middle of the day?
Yes.
Okay. So this was a joint media briefing delivered by Mayor Dilkins and Chief Mizuno. Do you recall that?
I do recall.
Okay. It was Mayor Dilkins' evidence yesterday that his public comments were reviewed by the chief of police or her staff so that there were no surprises when Windsor delivered a message. Did you hear him say that yesterday?
No, I did not hear him say
Okay.
that.
Other than the direction that you gave, that you discussed earlier, that requests for resources should not be made publicly, you were not engaged in communications, were you?
With the mayor
No,
Or with-
sorry, media communications.
that came from the city or, sorry, I'm not sure.
That came from the city or WPS. I understand from your statement or your witness summary that WPS continued to have responsibility for media releases and messages, right?
They worked alongside of our media officers, our OPP media officers, and everything was brought to the command table for review.
Okay, and you had no concerns with media releases or messaging after you arrived in Windsor?
No.
Have a couple of brief questions about the injunction and the continuation of the injunction. Earlier today, you described the injunction as a tool or an
Yes.
option for police.
Yes.
Can you confirm you never raised any concerns with the city of Windsor about seeking the injunction?
I did not raise concerns. No.
And you raised no concerns about the continuation of the injunction?
No.
You spoke with my friend Commission Counsel about the traffic plan, and this has been discussed in your cross-examination as well. I just wanted to confirm that the purpose of the traffic plan was to ensure the flow of traffic from Highway 401 to the Ambassador Bridge, correct?
It was to ensure that a protest did not occur again. Yes, but yes, to keep the flow safe.
Keep the flow safe and keep the flow of traffic over the Ambassador Bridge
Yes.
clear, yes? Okay. And the concrete barriers were installed on your direction?
Yes,
And this was to better manage future risk of vehicles being used for blockades, right?
exactly.
Excellent. Those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions by former Chief Slowly's counsel?
Thank you, Commissioner. Superintendent Early, Tom Curry for the former chief in Ottawa.
Hello.
A couple of things, just if I could sort one thing out. The issue that my friend Ms. King was just asking you about concerning the media here in, or not here in Windsor, when you were in Windsor, about resources, recall that issue?
Yes.
And my friend Mr. Au asked you about this. Do you recall that by the time you were here in Windsor as the critical incident commander, that a statement had been made in a media interview by the mayor that named the number of officers that the city had requested, City of Windsor or Windsor Police Service, I suppose, had requested being 100?
No, I was not aware that that
Okay.
was publicized.
Okay, so Commissioner, I have I raised this with the witness yesterday, the mayor yesterday, and he recalled something about that. My friend Ms. King and I have discussed this. Rather than show the media pieces and so on, I think it's accepted that on the 8th of February, the mayor, in an interview with, I think it was CTV News, named that number. So I just want to, and my friend Ms. King can just confirm that so.
So Jennifer King, counsel for Windsor, yes, we admit that that statement was made in an interview with CTV.
Thank you. Now, Superintendent Early, these issues that you dealt with in Windsor, this incident was the largest, presumably the largest critical incident you have managed in your career. Is that true?
Yes, it was one of.
Well, is it the largest though?
Yes,
Yeah, because you mobilized, if I understand from your institutional report or the services institutional report, there were in the end 410 members of your police service who were deployed in Windsor. True?
yes, over the times. That I
Yes,
shared.
and it would have peaked at a certain number and then dissipated as the demobilization went on. But in the
Correct.
max, 410. Yes,
Yes,
largest number that you've been in command of,
yes,
and among the largest in the province's history in terms of deployment of OPP service officers. True.
I would think so. I'm not sure.
And yet it was probably. Well, did you know how many were deployed in Ottawa?
No, I did not know numbers.
Your relationship with the events in Ottawa, can I speak about that for a moment? You had no direct involvement in the Ottawa incident. Is that true?
That's correct.
You had some points of contact, as you've discussed with Mr. Rao, about the letter, for example, but otherwise, those two incidents were managed separately by incident commanders in both locations. True?
Yes,
Okay. And ultimately, the strategic command is shared. It's common. True?
shared with,
Well, Ottawa and Windsor,
yes,
critical incident commanders share a common command structure, reporting eventually to deputy
Correct.
commissioners and commissioners. Yes?
yes, correct.
And so it is for the deputy commissioner or the commissioner ultimately to set the strategic objectives and priorities for the service
Yes,
in both Windsor and Ottawa.
yes.
And so when my friend all of the lawyers have probably asked you about this, but when you came to this, first of all, in your role as a superintendent in the region, you learned that there were convoys in the area heading to eventually to Essex County and to Windsor, correct?
There were convoys that I discussed earlier, sir. Is that what
Yes.
you're referring to? Those convoys actually stayed local in their respective municipalities.
Okay. And so your service was engaged in providing safe passage and just managing whatever comes from a slow roll, as it's been described, through your region, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And on the 6th of February, we know that the Hendon report alerted police services to the possibility that now on the 7th, there would be a blockade of the Ambassador Bridge. Recall?
I don't recall reading that
Okay.
specific report.
Someone in your command or below
Yes.
you in the chain of command responsible for intelligence would have that.
Yes.
And did the OPP under your region take any steps to intercept those convoys on their way to the Ambassador Bridge?
No, we did not have the information to indicate where they were coming from,
Right.
or what kind of vehicles or who would be involved.
Got it. So whatever intelligence came to you in your region through the Hendon reports was not sufficiently clear to be able to take steps, for example, to intercept a convoy for the reasons you've just given.
Right.
Okay. Now, eventually, after the Ambassador Bridge was blocked and then cleared, I think one of my colleagues asked you about the interception of a convoy that was heading to try to engage in another blockade, and the OPP did stop that convoy. Is that true?
Yes,
And you would have done that because by then, of course, you'd had the experience of the Ambassador Bridge blockade. You had the experience of the Ottawa blockade, or occupation as it's been described. And now you had actionable intelligence to say, including, I suppose, the Emergencies Act, to stop convoy protesters from engaging in further blockades. True?
correct.
Okay. Now, a couple of things, if I could, about your engagement as the critical incident commander that you've told us about today. The first things first, the issue about the importance of this, of clearing this particular protest on the Ambassador Bridge. You've spoken about that. Just to get your help on this, from your statement that you have read to us or has been filed, there is a reference on page 2, and I have the name of this, or they have the number, and I'm going to leave that for a second. I will offer a reward to anyone who can tell me the name of that or the number of that statement. Mr. Al. WTS. Yes, 22. Thank you, 22. Thank you, Mr. Registrar. Page 2 when we get there. Paragraph 3. You've seen this before. Upon, thank you. So this is a simple thing, but during a February 10th, 8:30 a.m. call, middle of the paragraph, do you see it? Deputy Commissioner Harkins, Commissioners Harkins and DeMarco again advised Superintendent Early that Windsor was the priority and that it was urgent to resolve the blockade. That's true, isn't it?
Yes,
And it was obvious in terms of setting the strategic direction, that is the role for not just Commissioner Creek, but also the deputy commissioners to say what are the priorities,
yes.
right? And in respect of the priorities, the rank order of these priorities, when they spoke to you about it being the priority, it was understood that it was the priority for the Ontario Provincial Police Service. Correct?
I understood it to be my priority. So it was my priority that I needed to focus on.
Yes, of course,
Yes.
it became your priority because you were the critical incident commander. But when they say it is the priority, you understood it was the priority for the service. True?
I understood that it was a priority and I would get whatever resources I needed.
Yes, that followed, and that's important. But it was when they spoke to you at 8:30 in the morning on the 10th and said it was the priority, it's the priority for the service.
I can't speak to that. You'd have to ask them.
Okay, well, we won't get a chance to do that. But you understood that whatever else it was going to be, that task was being handed to you.
Yes,
And when they said at the top of that statement, and we have your notes, of course, but I'm just in the interest of time. Upon Superintendent Early's appointment, Deputy Commissioner Harkins and Deputy Commissioner DeMarco communicated to her that Windsor was a priority and that she would receive whatever resources she needed, you needed.
yes,
You understood that.
yes,
And so prior to your ever picking up a pen and writing in your notes the mission statement,
yes,
you knew that whatever resources you needed, you had.
yes,
And in fact, they had already begun to roll out prior to your drafting the mission statement.
correct.
Now, of course, the resources of which we're speaking were a number of different things, but in the main, this you understood this was going to require POU resources, right?
Yes,
And they came from municipal services and as well from the hub that drew on OPP's resources, correct?
correct.
Can I just show you, please, OPP 4543. This is from your, this should be from your notebook with the scribe. And if we could go, please, to, I think it should be the first page initially. So this should be 2,200 hours on February the 9th, yeah? telephone conference with Hamilton Police Service and Windsor Police Service, Waterloo Regional Police Service to discuss POU support, and it's set out. And those are the calls that you placed in order to generate these resources. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then at 7:15 a.m., if we could just scroll down. This should be page 7. So now we're 7:15 on the, I suppose, the 10th. Yeah, Jamie Sheridan called to advise that he and his Waterloo POU team would be leaving rather, for Windsor at approximately 1100 hours. They were rolling.
That's correct.
And then at 8:30 on page 8, please. Just at the bottom, there it is. Telephone conference with Deputy Harkins. Just scroll down, if we could please a little bit. And DeMarco. Deputies advised whatever is needed for plan will be available. Province focus is Windsor. And that's, again, that goes to the point that I was making earlier. The provincial focus is Windsor for obvious reasons. The Ambassador Bridge is vitally important, right?
Right. Those were, from the teleconference.
When you write down, or the scribe rather writes down, province focus is Windsor, those are the words spoken by one or both of the commissioners, deputies.
It's in the context of the conversation.
Got it. Harkins speaking with RCMP today and will forward POU command. RCMP can send POU team of 150 people. Advise deputies, Amy Ferguson, perhaps?
Angela Ferguson.
Angela, thank you. Short form for Angela. Will be POU commander for OPP. Waterloo Regional Police Service will arrive approximately 1300 this afternoon. Harkins advised there is an urgency to get this resolved. Did he need to explain to you why that was urgent, or did you understand the importance of the Ambassador Bridge?
I understood.
Of course, by then it was in the popular press as well that this blockade was causing enormous disruption.
Yes, and I had also had conversations with Deputy Chief Crowley at this time and had more of a situational awareness.
Understood. Now, and then you wrote out your mission statement at 0900. Can I see that at page 9, please? Now, these mission statements, just, there it is. Is that your handwriting or the scribe?
Scribe.
Okay, so you dictated this on, maybe in the car, I don't know.
Yes.
The OPP and our policing partners, and it carries on, I won't read it all. The mission statement in Windsor is very similar to the mission statement that was used in Ottawa. Have you ever seen that one?
No, I have not.
Are the mission statements, I don't want to diminish the importance of mission statements. I like mission statements too. They're very important. But these are very generic, general statements that are used in a number of different OPP operations. Is that fair?
Yeah.
The elements are very simple.
The elements are similar, yes.
Right.
But each situation would dictate the final mission.
Right. So
statement.
safe flow of traffic, for example, is the thing that makes this Windsor specific.
Yes.
This one looks awfully much like the OPP mission statement for Caledonia, doesn't it?
I haven't seen that one.
Did you go
It's
to
been a
Caledonia?
while.
Were you involved in Caledonia?
I wasn't on the front line, but as a strategic commander, I was involved somewhat.
And do you recall the mission statement?
I don't.
Do you agree with me that it would, I don't want to pull it up, but do you agree with me that the mission statement for a protest like Caledonia would have similar elements?
They would have similar elements.
The only thing that's missing is free flowing traffic where because Caledonia it involved an occupation of a different kind, right?
Correct.
And do you agree that that one was a very difficult demonstration to try to resolve and was not really ever resolved by a policing solution?
It was a challenge, yes.
And do you agree it wasn't resolved by a policing solution?
I'd have to look at my notes, or I don't
Okay.
recall. I wasn't involved
Sure.
on the
What was
ground.
you were a strategic commander there?
For some of it,
Okay.
yes.
Put it this way, those protesters were never removed by a POU action, right?
Correct.
Eventually, I think the province reached a financial settlement and acquired the land over which the protest was being held.
Correct.
Okay. And then a couple of other things, if I can. Ottawa and Windsor, very different situations, correct?
Yes.
Ottawa, larger, more complex, more challenging,
Larger, yes.
more complex?
Each incident had its complexities.
Yes,
and
but of course,
challenges.
I'm asking if you can rank them. If you can't, just tell me. But isn't it obvious that Ottawa is a more complex problem even than the one in Windsor?
I would say that it had different challenges than the incident in Windsor.
Okay.
And much larger, yes, I will agree to that.
Can I get from you that the different challenges of which you're speaking are many more challenges?
I wasn't in Ottawa, so it's hard for me to
Okay.
speak to that, sir.
Fair enough. Now, the incident command system and autonomy. Today, you made a change to the statement that that was filed. And Commissioner, I'm going to borrow, not borrow, well, it is a loan, I suppose. I gather that my colleagues from Ottawa are not going to use their time or perhaps all of their time. So if I could just have a couple of their minutes, thank you. I'll be quick as I can be.
Have they been offered?
Yes.
They have. We're prepared to cede our 10
Thank you.
minutes, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you. So Superintendent, I'll just be brief with a few other things. Today, you made a change to the statement. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And did my friend Mr. Al raise that with you this morning before you came here?
No, I raised it when I reviewed my statement
Okay, when did you review it? Just today?
within the last couple days.
Okay. Had you reviewed it before when it was sent to you? Or was it, did they send it to you after they took it in September?
Yes, they did.
And
I
you
didn't,
read it but didn't
yeah, and I
notice
didn't
that?
catch it then. No.
Okay. The reason I ask is because yesterday I asked Deputy Crowley about whether he knew about that aspect, and I wondered if that's what prompted this. Did you see that yesterday?
I watched his testimony.
Okay, good. Is that what prompted you to catch this?
No, absolutely not. I caught it prior to that.
Okay. And the line that you wanted to take out or did take out was she informed them, commissioners, or the team rather, that the change in direction came from Commissioner Creek and Deputy Commissioner Harkins. And you would say, instead of that line, more accurately, you made the change after your conversation with Commissioner Harkins, Deputy Harkins rather, and Commissioner Creek.
That's correct.
Now they have the two senior commands, Deputy Chief or Deputy Commissioner Harkins and Superintendent Commissioner Creek, have overall strategic command, right?
Correct.
And so they set the strategic direction that the critical incident commander implements.
Yes.
So there's nothing wrong. Am I right? There's nothing wrong with Commissioner Creek and Deputy Commissioner Harkins telling you that you should not delay your operation while a letter goes to the protesters in Ottawa, but to get on with the operation in Windsor. That would not be overstepping their authority, would it?
I see it as overstepping. The operational control of the incident was mine. That decision had to be made by me.
Yes, but of course so what happened in the sequence, and this is important because my friends, I predict are going to say that what you did in Windsor informs what should have happened in Ottawa. So this is important for reasons that you may not appreciate, but let me just ask you. If I understand it, what happened in Windsor is that a protester, Mr. Neufeld,
Correct.
came to a PLT officer and said, "We'll all leave if you give us a letter from the government."
Yes.
And so you mobilize the government to write a letter, and the Solicitor General writes a letter to say, "We'll meet with you if you denounce your unlawful actions," and everybody goes home.
Yes.
And that letter gets to Mr. Neufeld.
Yes.
And of course, what does he do with it?
It's shared with everybody, but it did not produce the reaction we were hoping for.
Do we know anything about Mr. Neufeld?
I don't.
Did you at the time, or did you leave it to PLT?
I left it to PLT.
Okay.
I'm sure the information would be
Right.
available in my notes, but
Okay, fair enough. I couldn't find it, but I'll admit there are a lot of records. And at the same time, you said, well, we can't give Mr. Neufeld a letter from the provincial government, from a minister of the Crown, without provoking possibly a reaction from the Ottawa protesters who aren't getting a letter from the Solicitor General.
I did not say it in that way, but I made sure that since a letter from the government was being issued to the protest in Windsor, that people were aware across the province that that was happening.
Got it. And you said, stop the presses. Let's not take action until we give a letter to Ottawa. to the Ottawa protest.
There was discussion in regards to that, yes.
And then the commissioner, or, well, first of all, the deputy commissioner rang you, correct?
Yes,
And expressed the view that that was not the strategy he wished to follow.
it was suggested that I reevaluate because I was not aware of the details of what was happening in Ottawa as he was and as the commissioner was.
Yes. In other words, they've got strategic command.
Yes,
And they, and may I just please go back to that statement at 22, yeah? WTS 22, please, page 13. I'll just be a second with this. Thank you. During a 6:47 PM call, and we have the scribe notes, but I'll do it this way. On the same date, Deputy Commissioner Harkins told Superintendent Early not to pause enforcement out of concern about the potential impact on the Ottawa protesters. That's true?
that's true. I shared with him that I had decided to pause it based on that. And then
Yeah.
he shared with me insight in regards to what was going on in Ottawa. And that if that was the main reason, not to pause enforcement based on that.
Got it. And so he called you at that time.
I don't recall if he called me or I was updating him.
Well, so if we just scroll up a little bit, I think he called you because, stop, Superintendent Early advised her command table at 6:17 on the 11th, she had
Yes.
decided to pause the enforcement action.
Yes.
Scroll down. During a 6:47 call, Deputy Harkins told you not to pause enforcement. So do you now recall that word got to him and he had a different view?
I don't recall if I called him or he called me, to be honest.
Okay.
I'd have to,
Well, if you called him, it was to check in with him, was it?
it was to bring in an update.
Okay. And when you did, it was that you were pausing.
It was, yeah, it was a
And Commissioner,
discussion of my decision.
thank you. Deputy Commissioner Harkins said, don't pause.
We discussed my reasons for wanting to pause. And he said if it was solely based on Ottawa, that you should not, not to worry about it, to remain focused on Windsor.
Thank you.
And that's
then-
when I-
and at the bottom, you pointed out the risk.
Yes,
You advised of the risk that police enforcement could have impacts on Ottawa and lead to an increase in aggression and violence by protesters in Ottawa, correct?
no, though the aggression and the violence by protesters was in regards to the response to the operational plan that I was going to move forward with in Windsor.
But what does that have to do with, I'm not following that. Isn't it Ottawa that you were concerned with? Because look at the last sentence. You advised Deputy Commissioner Harkins of the risk that police enforcement action could have impacts on Ottawa and lead to an increase in aggression and violence by protesters. Mustn't those protesters be the ones in Ottawa?
It would be protesters wherever across the province. And so that's why we were discussing it.
Okay. But it includes Ottawa at least.
Yes,
Deputy Commissioner Harkins confirms that he's aware, and then a few minutes later, you have a call now with Commissioner Carrick and
and
the
deputy,
deputy.
yes.
And am I right that the deputy got Commissioner Carrick on because he wanted to emphasize the message to you that he was giving, which is you should go ahead and clear the Ambassador Bridge?
They supported me moving forward with the plan.
Yeah, well, when you say support, you see, Superintendent, what they supported was a different decision than the one you had taken to the command table. You wanted to pause,
Yes,
and they said, don't pause.
they provided me with information that made me change my mind that the pause was not necessary, that we were ready to go, and reminded me that Windsor was my priority.
I mean, I know that can sound like it's semantics, but it's not really semantics because it's not information they provided to you. It's direction they provided to you, isn't it?
It was a discussion. I did not find that it was directive. It was a discussion that we had about my reasons for pausing.
They simply took a different view than you about the importance of not giving a letter to the Ottawa protesters, right?
No, the letter was going to be given regardless.
Well, okay, then pausing but you wanted to give the letter to Ottawa and then let it go and do its work, right?
That was what my first option was, and that's what I was considering.
And so they said, here's our judgment as strategic commanders, you're a go, clear the Ambassador Bridge.
Yes,
did.
that was part of the discussion.
Got it. Now, finally, the PLT, we spoke about this briefly, but the PLT was not able to make yards on this protest. It was a failure of the ability to negotiate with this group of disparate protesters, right?
I wouldn't call any work of the provincial liaison team a failure. Their effort was there, but it did not produce the results that we were hoping.
Right. And well, there are only two ways down this mountain. Either those protesters were going to leave because you asked them to leave and negotiated their withdrawal, including by giving a letter from the Solicitor General of the province,
Correct.
or you were going to have to muscle them out with a POU operation, right?
Use an operational plan from POU, yes.
Last question then, please, just on the issue of strategic command. Could I show you, please, WTS 39? This is the witness statement from the commissioner. And I just need your help again, because it may be important to sorting out the roles and responsibilities of strategic commanders and incident commanders. Page 8, please. Under the heading Incident Command System, the commissioner said this, and I don't know whether you've seen this. Fourth line down, while some incident commanders, do you see it?
Yes.
May feel as though they have complete autonomy. This is not the case. The chief or commissioner remains responsible to provide adequate and effective police services, is accountable to the board under the Police Services Act in the case of a municipal police service, and is entitled to set strategic direction or give lawful orders. However, incident commanders should have operational autonomy to carry out strategic objectives set by senior command. And that's accurate.
Yes.
And so what occurred between you and Deputy Commissioner Harkins and Commissioner Creek was simply that. Is that
Yes.
fair?
Fair.
Okay. Commissioner, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, you and City of Ottawa are overdrawn, but we'll see when we get to Ottawa. The Windsor Police Service.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Good afternoon, Superintendent.
Good afternoon.
My name is Tom McCrae. I'm here for the Windsor Police Service. I only have a couple of questions.
Okay.
I believe you told one of my friends earlier today that Windsor Police Service was responsible for the arrests that were made.
Yes, it's their
those-
jurisdiction.
And I take it that they were also responsible for developing the arrest plans. Is that correct?
They worked with me, like every other plan,
Yeah.
to create the arrest plan.
And the prisoner transportation plans too?
Yes, we worked alongside of each other to create those plans.
Thank you. There's an organization that I've learned about called the Ontario Women in Law Enforcement. Are you aware of them?
Yes.
And I understand that you were awarded, together with members of both the OPP and Windsor Police Service, with the Teamwork Award this past June. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I also understand that it was Deputy Chief Crowley who put you up for that award. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. City of Ottawa.
We ceded our time, so we have no questions, Commissioner. Thank you.
Ottawa Police Service.
Good afternoon, Superintendent. I'm Jessica Barrow, and I'm counsel for the Ottawa Police Service.
Hello.
I just wanted to clarify one quick thing with you that came out of your conversation with Mr. Curry, and that's the change that you made this morning to your witness statement.
Yes.
So just to make sure I have it correct, what you indicated this morning was that you had a conversation with Commissioner Creek as well as the Deputy Commissioner
Yes.
in relation to whether to stand down the Windsor operation.
Yes.
And as a result of that conversation, you ultimately decided to revert course and continue with the Windsor operation,
Correct.
correct? And just so that I understand it, the reason for that was because you obtained new information in the course of that conversation, correct?
Correct.
And you couldn't otherwise have had that information previously because you were in charge of the Windsor operation.
That's correct.
And you had limited information, or I think line of sight into that operation in Ottawa.
That's correct.
And so it was less a question of being directive and more about sharing information with you that you couldn't otherwise have had prior to that meeting.
That's correct.
And so as a result of that meeting, you decided that the risks you initially were concerned about were not concerns after all, and you could proceed with your operation.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Next, the Ottawa Coalition of Residents and Businesses.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Emily Tamman for the Ottawa Coalition. We don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The convoy organizers.
Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner. Bathsheba Vandenberg for Freedom Corp and protesters. We have no questions for Superintendent Early. Thank you.
Thank you. National Police Federation.
Hello, this is Lauren Pierce for the National Police Federation. We also have no questions.
Okay. The province of Alberta.
Good afternoon. This is Stephanie Bose for the province of Alberta. We have no further questions.
Okay. The Ontario Provincial Police.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have no questions.
Any re-examination?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, that was obviously very clear evidence. Nobody seems to want to cross-examine you, or limited, I should say. Well, thank you very much for attending. You're free to go, and we thank you for your evidence.
Thank you.
So, given the speedy way in which we went through this, I think we'll take an hour and 9 minutes for lunch today. So we'll come back at 2:00.
The commission is in recess until 2 o'clock. La commission est levée
Thank you
jusqu'à
very much, and
14 heures.
congratulations.
Oh, thank
It's